There are 4 incontrovertible proofs that we didn't go to the moon. We just proved the moon landing was fake in 1 photograph. If the moon rocks are fake, what about the moon mission? Say, you know what's on here? It's the crew of Apollo 11 faking being halfway to the moon, proving they didn't go to the moon. And I'm like, am I under arrest? They don't answer me. Am I free to go? They don't answer me. For some strange reason, the CIA is all over the launch pad today. The very next day, he's dead from faulty equipment. And so when I make my way back to Nashville, I know I've got this exotic truth serum drug in me. The faking of the moon landing is so much more profound historically than if they actually had gone. They faked it 6 times. They took the American people for suckers 6 times. That's how arrogant these people are. He made it clear to me that I am correct, and good luck trying to prove it.
Why has nobody been to the moon in such a long time?
That's not an 8-year-old's question. That's my question. I want to know, but I think I know. Because we didn't go there, and that's the way it happened.
And so the moon landing really is the poster child of conspiracy theories, right? Though they faked the moon landing. The director of YouTube went before Congress, and her number 1 example as to why they need to do censorship is for people saying the moon landing is fake. And then when it dawns on you, after extensive research and a millionaire backing you who builds rockets for NASA, who knows the moon missions are fake, and then when we'll get into it, I found concrete proof that they were indeed falsified. I just, wept quietly. It's so sad when you realize they actually did fake the moon landing. And more people are waking up to that. I saw before we began the clip of Joe Rogan, and I got a lot of positive feedback about that. I did Coast to Coast, I think 4 times. And after I did it the very first time, I got 2,000 emails in 1 day. And our film, A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon, which you can see for free at Sibrel.com, it actually outsold Gladiator after doing the Coast to Coast interview. But of those 2,000 emails that I got, now this is about 25 years ago, 9 out of 10 of them were, how dare you say such a thing, multiple death threats, multiple emails with curse words in them. And then about 5 years ago, there was like a paradigm shift where 9 out of 10 emails were supportive. And that really happened after the Joe Rogan podcast. People said, I assumed they were real, always thought they were real. But after watching us discuss it for just 3 hours, they're totally convinced that they were fake. And then, of course, my book reaffirms that. The book is more of the backstory behind the production of the film, A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon, the highlight of which is classified footage of them faking part of the Apollo mission right in front of your eyes with the CIA on a secret track of audio telling them how to fake it better. And that's what convinced me. I tried to give them the benefit of the doubt as long as possible. I was a big fan of the moon missions. I had a shrine to them. You know how you have your Egyptian artifacts here? I had like Apollo artifacts, pictures. I thought it was grandiose. So if I can go from that to being the leading spokesperson that, yes, they did, unfortunately, falsify it. And what people need to understand is the falsification of the moon landing is so much more profound historically than if they'd actually gone. Do you see that? Either they went, they planted a flag, they came back, even though they can't do it today with 5 decades better technology. Oh, that was a close one. Glad we did that and survived. Or the most powerful nation on earth that claims to be, the best example of truth and justice, lied about the most historic event in history and murdered their own people to cover it up and embezzled $250 billion from the taxpayers. And you would think, Matt, I've already had every revelation there is to have about the moon landing fraud. That's not true. They're still coming to me. I wake up just a few weeks ago, and I, of course, knew that they faked it 6 times. I mean, statistically, it wasn't like I didn't know they didn't claim to go 6 times. But what that meant dawned on me just a few weeks ago. You know, if they had faked it once and then just never did it again, that's wrong. It's evil. But they faked it 6 times. They took the American people for suckers 6 times. That's how arrogant these people are. And they're at large. When someone robs a bank and gets away with it, they're just going to keep robbing it and keep taking more and more and more. That's why it's so important for the truth about this to come out. There are many people in Washington, at least now, who claim to be anti-corruption. But their number one tool, the most powerful tool to bring down the corruption, is to show the public that the federal government faked the moon landing. It will shock people. It will anger people. That's the best way to have a new government. Otherwise, they are complicit with the lie, and this lie is being taught to school children and college students, and the evil forces are winning because we're still propagating their work.
Yeah. Wow. That's a hell of an introduction.
I didn't mean it to be, but
no, it is. It's a great summary of the situation.
I find myself getting more passionate about this because it's like, let's just say there's a bucket of water there because there's a leak in the roof, drip, drip, and the next day there's one there, and then there, and I come visit you 3 years from now, and the buckets are still here. It's like, when are we going to fix the roof?
Right.
When is the truth going to come out? And as you know, they murdered people to cover this up. That is so wrong.
Yeah, I want to talk about
when
that.
is this going to come out? Mm-hmm. You know, that's why I keep getting more passionate about it as time goes by.
Right, right. Yeah, I want to talk about that. I want to talk about the people that were murdered to cover this thing up. But first, can I ask you about the Joe Rogan experience? Mm-hmm. What was that like? I mean, the interaction between you and Joe, at times it seems like he was all in, you know, moon landing fake, and then at times it seemed like he was kind of, you know, questioning it himself. What was the experience like with Joe, and what were his real thoughts on it?
Well, I'm having a revelation about that now too. The Joe Rogan experience.
Yeah,
right. It was an experience, and that normally when I do an interview, and I probably have done 300 of them, I'm either like, that went great, or, you know, I could have done better. After that one, I'm like, what was that? When we produced our film, a funny thing happened on the way to the moon. Fox bought it. They were going to broadcast it, and they chickened out a few days beforehand. They refused to show the footage of them faking part of the moon mission right in front of our eyes. The NBC did the same thing. They flew me to New York. They said, we're going to break the story nationwide. We have proof. Everyone in the news department said this proves we didn't go to the moon. They got a threatening phone call from the federal government. Well, somehow, before the Fox special aired, which they changed to conspiracy theory, did we land on the moon, rather than broadcasting my film, Joe Rogan had heard about it somehow. You know, he did a lot of TV in L.A. He sends me an email and says, hey, Bart, if you're ever in L.A., let me take you out to dinner. And I happened to be in L.A.
when
I got the email. I said, oh, it's great. So he picks me up the next day. We go to this, great restaurant. And he's like, Bart, I know the moon missions are fake. I've known it for a long time. What can I do to help? And then I don't hear from him for a long time. Everybody was asking me for years, why haven't I done the Joe Rogan show? Because it would seem that this would be important. Why hadn't I done the Alex Jones show at that time? The top 2 podcasters, it seems like, don't want to talk about the greatest government fraud of all time. He has on Robert Malone, who was one of the inventors of this medicine people were taking for an illness they didn't even have, who said, not to take it. And I don't think he took the pharmaceutical company side for 3 hours, although I didn't see the interview. So while I'm there and I know what his real opinion is, and he keeps acting like he thinks the moon missions are real, I'm like, what is going on? And so about halfway through, we take a bathroom break. I like yours better. It's a lunch break. And I'm like, what are you doing? You know they didn't go to the moon. He says, no, trust me. I'm doing this for a reason. There's a new generation of people who don't know about this, and I'm doing it for this way for their benefit. And I'm like, I had no clue of understanding what he was talking about. I disagreed completely. And then I get a review that you can read on the homepage of Sibrel.com of someone who saw the Rogan interview. And he said, look, I used to think it was real. After watching it, I know it's not. I read your book. It reinforced everything. And then I'm thinking, oh, I guess Joe was right. I guess he's older and wiser than I gave him credit for. And apparently the way that he did it worked. Because we talked out all the reasons why people still defend the moon landing. But now, of course, they know otherwise. He invited me back for a debate, and not something I would really be interested in. However, he took really good care of me and my wife who traveled with me. And for him, I said, okay, personally, I don't want to debate if the sky is blue. It's blue. So it's like a waste of time to debate it for 3 hours for someone who thinks it's green. Plus, the person who thinks it's green is not open-minded, so it's a double waste of time. But if he really wants to, I agreed. And then I would be debating really a victim of the deception. Do you understand? It's like debating a victim of someone who was molested rather than the molester. I'm like, bring up NASA's administrator, bring up one of these lying astronauts, them I'll debate. But I'm debating a victim. I used to be their victim. I used to think it was real. So maybe I'll go back because he said he wanted to have me back on. Maybe I'll do my first debate. I've never debated it. I present the evidence on my website. I present it in my book and take it or leave it. So,
who was the person that he wanted you to debate? Do you know?
I forgot the guy's name, but I could look it up and let you
all
know.
Good.
He's one of these scientists who thinks he's right about everything.
Got it.
And you mentioned something early on. People who believe it no matter what. I've said before, I talked to a college professor teaching aerospace at one of America's most prestigious universities. I showed him all this proof, which we're going to get into, why the moon missions are fake. He said, look, Bart, there's nothing you could say that would make me recant the glorious moon landings. And then I said, well, what if you saw an Apollo astronaut on national TV tearfully confessing they were fake? They were shot at Cannon Air Force Base, just like Bart Sibrel says. I'm really sorry. Please forgive me. The professor said he would still think he walked on the moon anyway. Do you see what we're up against? Whoever killed Kennedy, it's a tragedy. Whoever did 9/11, it's a tragedy. This is a positive lie that was giving people what they wanted to hear. You see, and I'm come along trying to take away that sweet candy and give them the reality of the plate of manure. They're not interested. They would rather believe the lie. Bill Maher and Glenn Beck are on opposite ends of belief, except the glorious moon landings. They both do not want to give it up. Glenn Beck's mind, I know America has gotten bad, but at least we went to the moon. Tucker Carlson said, the idea that the NSA spied on the President of the United States' private phone call is as absurd as the moon landings being fake. And then it came out they did spy.
So it's not absurd at all.
So what about the other one there, Tucker? Right? You haven't had me on your show either because he's afraid to go that far. That's why people need to know the truth all the more because it is that bad. Do you see that? And they're not knowing this great historical truth. It's like having a cure for cancer that's being withheld. If mankind doesn't know that the most powerful nation has become the most corrupt, and it's not just about America, it's about us as a species. We can't tell the truth to one another. It dawned on me, Matt, that the faking of the moon landing is juvenile. Do you realize that? The people who ran the country couldn't admit that they bit off more than they could chew. And so they falsified it. They murdered people to cover it up. Our leaders are immature, and they're robbing us of our money, which is being used to deceive us and pay the salaries of CIA agents who are killing our neighbors. They have to know it's become that bad. And if not, we'll never get any better.
So when you say bit off more than they can chew, you're talking about Kennedy announcing in the early 60s, we're going to the moon this decade, we're going to do it. And then he kind of painted himself into a corner, I guess.
That's
right?
exactly what he said.
Yeah.
And private tapes that came out, he said he wished he had never said it. He used an analogy of an old Irish folk story about these two brothers coming to a landowner's big wall. And of course, they're challenging each other. You know, can you climb the wall? I can climb the wall. So the older brother takes the hat of the younger brother and throws it over the wall and says, now you have to go. And he said, Kennedy said he did the same thing. He made this boast in front of the world. Now we're in trouble. And you know, NASA has never kept a schedule, not a single time in their entire history, except the most complicated mission of all time. They were ahead of schedule. Pretty remarkable, huh?
Pretty remarkable, yeah. Phil Platt was the guy who Rogan wanted you to
No, it was somebody else.
Oh, really? Okay.
I've talked to Phil Platt privately.
Okay.
He finally admitted to me he receives funding from NASA.
Okay.
So he's one of those people. I'm not even sure an astronaut confessing that he would recant the glorious moon landings.
Yeah.
He has tunnel vision. You see, there are intelligent people like him, but they are only intelligent in this narrow field. I can do brain surgery, but nothing else. Can't tie my shoes or whatever. And he's that way. He has such tunnel vision. He is not open-minded to the truth, right? The book of Obadiah says pride prevents us from seeing the truth. You have to be willing to be wrong. Pride is simply the unwillingness to be wrong, and humility is the willingness to be wrong. I came upon the idea that the moon missions were fake as a 14-year-old. I'm like, never thought about that. Went back to my shrine, looked at the pictures, and I'm like, the soil looks real up to a point, and then horizontally, it suddenly becomes out of focus and changes color. It does look like a wall behind them. So you have to have an open mind, and those people do not have an open mind, and that adds all the more to the certainty that they're wrong.
I'm going to ask you a difficult question. Are you open-minded to the possibility that the moon landing did happen? Is there any, or is the evidence just so overwhelmingly conclusive that the moon landing was fake?
Well, that's a good question, and the answer is I've already proven I'm open-minded. I used to worship the moon landings. I used to have a shrine in my house that followed me from location to location to location. The centerpiece of my room was the moon landing photographs. I've already proved I've had an open mind. They have not. I went from being the greatest fan to the greatest critic, and if that's not proving that I have an open mind and I'm looking for the truth, I don't know what will.
So Rogan, man, that's crazy that he approached you and he said, I totally think the moon landing was fake. It was staged. And then he got you on the show, and then he takes a different kind of approach to it and only updates you on the approach at halftime during a restroom break. That must have caught you off guard a little bit.
Well, yeah, it did catch me off guard. It was kind of frustrating knowing what he really believes and acting like the opposite for 3 hours.
Yeah.
He said there were strategic reasons why he did it, and apparently he was right, I was wrong. Yeah. With that email that's on the website, the guy said, whatever happened in the experience of Joe Rogan, it must have worked. Yeah. So maybe he's older than wiser than I gave him credit for.
He's a sharp guy. What have you done many other large podcasts? I saw you on Candace Owens, maybe.
Yeah, and I did Patrick Beck-David as well. And then Les Friedman asked me to do a show, but we can't seem to coordinate our schedules of being in the country at the same time.
Okay.
So
you doing any others on this trip that you've got right now?
I did Luke Rudowski yesterday. Okay. He's an up-and-coming podcaster. Actually, he's been around a while. Not too many people know about him. He has, I think, slightly less than 1 million subscribers on YouTube, but I like him. I don't agree with everything he says, but he seems genuine, open-minded, and looking for the truth. He'll criticize Trump. Trump's a fool for doing it that way. And next week he says, Trump did this right. And you can trust a person like that.
Yep, no doubt. Well, you want to dig right into the evidence, man, and to kind of the story?
I suppose.
Yeah, we might as well do it, right?
Yeah. Let me just say, I wish the moon landings were real.
Yeah.
The world would be a better place. Our country would be a better place. And if it weren't for people's pride and it being a positive lie, they would see the truth plainly. Just like most people who watch the Joe Rogan show, they reverse their opinion because they're open-minded. And so the way that I look at it, Matt, there are 4 incontrovertible proofs that we didn't go to the moon. Each one by itself would prove it in a court of law. And so if your producer wants to bring up the picture where we have basically 2 images side by side, you can prove that the moon landings are fake with 1 photograph. Now, I'm a filmmaker. A filmmaker's job is to make fake scenes look real. They claim that on the moon, it's 20 times brighter than a desert on Earth at noon because there's no atmosphere. So the last thing you would need in a picture on the moon would be electrical lighting. On the left is a picture I took outside in sunlight. You can do this yourself. Go outside on a cloudless day, look at 2 people standing, 2 trees, 2 telephone poles, which this is, and you can see the shadows always run parallel. It's mathematically and scientifically impossible for shadows in sunlight to ever intersect. Impossible. On the right is a picture they claim was from the last, quote, mission to the moon, where an astronaut shadow is at 12 o'clock and a rock 5 feet away is intersecting at 9 o'clock at 90 degrees. That is an electrical light that is very, very close to those objects. That proves in a court of law that picture on the right was taken with a very close electrical light, which means they're on Earth, which means they did not go to the moon. That's it. We just proved the moon landing was fake in 1 photograph.
Do we have I think there's a more zoomed out image of this photograph on the right, Ryan. This feels a little zoomed. There's more rocks on the one that I saw, but you're right. So the rock on the left is casting a shadow that is going directly to the left.
Well, here's another example of intersecting shadows. There's a shadow of an antenna, which is going, at about 10 o'clock, and the astronaut shadow a few feet away is going at 12 o'clock. This is another example of intersecting shadows, which means it's an electrical light that's really close. Because the sun is 93 million miles away, 1 million times bigger than the Earth in volume, it would always cast shadows parallel with one another, no matter what time of day, no matter whether the landscape is angular or not.
But what if that would be the case on a flat surface, right? But if this is a curved surface?
No, it doesn't matter. If you go back to the original picture, you'll see one of the telephone pole shadows. Actually, you can't see it, it's a little off camera, but it goes up the side of the house. So both shadows go up the side of the house and remain parallel up the side of the house. So it doesn't matter. Even if the landscape changes by 90 degrees with the house, that shadow, which you can't see though, goes straight up. And if the shadow from the telephone pole were next to it, or if the house was bigger, it would also go straight up and remain parallel. It doesn't make them intersect, regardless of the landscape. They remain parallel.
Okay. So the one on the right, if you're saying that there's multiple light sources.
Well, or there's either 2 light sources or 1 light source that is really close, because they're diverging at 90 degrees from objects 5 feet apart. And I can tell you as a professional filmmaker, that's taken with an electrical light that's very close.
Okay. And so that's why you're saying that the rock on the right, it doesn't have a shadow that's casted up.
Yeah, either the astronaut shadow should be going at 9 o'clock or the rock shadow should be going at 12 o'clock. They're 90 degree difference and they're only 5 feet apart, which means it's either one electrical light that's really close, and if you stand on one side of the light, it's going to put a shadow in one direction. If you stand on the other side of the light, it'll cast a different direction, or maybe it's 2 electrical lights. But in either case, it's electrical light, which means they're not on the moon, they're on Earth. And because this is the last mission they claim to have gone, it means they never went. I thought, well, maybe they faked the first one, got their act together. But no, this is from the alleged last mission to the moon. And it has more intersecting shadows in its pictures than any of the other missions. So they never went. Plus, they had identical equipment. And we're going to show the footage of them faking being halfway to the moon, proving the equipment cannot leave Earth orbit, and seeing how it's all clones of one another. If Apollo 11 can't leave Earth orbit, then none of them can. And then here we are, 56 years later, and they have mannequins orbiting the moon instead of people, right? Somehow they can drive cars and play golf on the moon with 1960s technology, but the best we can do 56 years later is have mannequins orbit the moon. Why aren't there people orbiting the moon? They said in 2014 they're going to have people orbiting the moon in 2018. They're 100% behind schedule, and they only have mannequins orbiting the moon because of deadly radiation, which we'll get into as well.
Okay, so is this a different photo on the left than the one that we were just looking at, or is that the same?
No, it was just a more zoomed in portion.
Okay,
So you see basically you have the astronaut shadow going at 12 o'clock and the shadow of the lunar module and this piece of equipment that's off camera that's casting a shadow. They're going at about 10 o'clock. So you can't have shadows intersecting when they're so close to one another if it's sunlight. And recently in Moscow, and you could call this the fifth proof, the most intelligent computer in the world, called Google's neural network. Multiple AIs hooked up together, not available to the public, but it was at a convention. They let a few VIPs play with it for 3 days. One had it write a symphony in 2 seconds. One had it write a novel with a few plot points in 2 seconds. And it has a deep fake detector program that's never been wrong. You can feed it a video of Biden or Trump. It'll tell you in 1 second whether it's real or not. They fed it pictures of the surface of the moon from the unmanned Chinese probes from 2014. Said they're real. Every Apollo picture it said was fake. It had a fake backdrop. It was taken in a television studio. That's the most intelligent computer in the world that can understand the pixels. One of them, it suggested that this wasn't even a full-size lunar module, that it was a miniature. And that's how they were able to do wide landscapes, because one of the astronauts' figures, the AI said, was a miniature because the footsteps shadows weren't normal the way a person would walk, that they were stamped in there with a fake footprint. This is Putin being shown that the AI has just concluded that the moon pictures are fake, meaning they didn't go to the moon, and side by side that the unmanned probes from China are real. Why isn't this story on RT, right? Because the Russians are blackmailing the United States government. I have a friend who works in the Space Center headquarters in China. He told me everybody knows that the moon missions are fake. They're blackmailing NASA. Another good reason for the truth to come out. Congress forbid the United States to give any space technology to China, but the CIA is giving it to them anyway because they're blackmailing them to reveal the moon landing fraud if you don't. Same thing with Russia. That's why Russia never covered this, because they have a deal under the table. So that's one of the excuses that people use, that it must be real because the Russians or the Chinese would have ratted us out. But that's not really the case, because the more valuable way of using that information is to blackmail the U.S. decade after decade, administration after administration. And then some people say, well, you can't keep a secret from hundreds of thousands of people involved, but actually you can, because the atomic bomb was the greatest secret during World War II. It involved 129,500 people, and only 8 people knew what they were building. I talked to Eugene Krantz. He said someone in the command center during an Apollo launch can tell no difference whatsoever between a simulation and a, quote, real flight, just a bunch of numbers going by. So if they can't tell in the command center, then we certainly couldn't tell watching it as a child on TV or years later on videotape. It's like what a bank teller knows. You know, Bank of America has 500,000 bank tellers. But what they know about corruption in the bank and what the CEO knows are completely different, you see?
Yeah, I think it's a ridiculous argument that 400,000 people would have to be involved in this thing to cover it up. It doesn't
No.
make sense. You just need a very, very small number of people to be involved. If this was faked and if you were trying to, fake this thing. I want to understand the shadows. There's so much evidence, and I don't want to get hung up on this one part of it. But Ryan, you had a more zoomed out image of the shadows. Can you pull that one? Yeah. So if there's one light source behind him, wouldn't the shadows be diverging?
Well, they are diverging because his shadow is going at 12 o'clock and the other shadow is going at 10 o'clock. You see also the hot spot. Look at the shadow where the head of the alleged astronaut is. It's washed out. You see, this area is dark and that area is light. Why is that? The sun's 93 million miles away and a million times bigger than the Earth. Why is there a hot spot there? Because it's an electrical light. That's what an electrical light does. Electrical lights throw diverging shadows, not the sun.
So it's one electrical light because there's only one shadow off of each rock. There's only one shadow on each rock, and each object is only thrown off one shadow. But so there's not multiple. So that's what you're saying, right?
Well, I don't know. There could be more than one electrical light, but either way, it's electrical light. You see, either they're diverging because they're on different sides of an electrical light, or there's more than one electrical light. But in any case, it's an electrical light because sunlight shadows are always parallel. I show that first picture because it's the greatest or most extreme example of it. 90-degree difference from objects 5 feet apart. You could prove that in a court of law. You could take the jury out and show them 2 trees, 2 telephone poles like I showed. Then you could bring them in the courtroom, bring in 1 or 2 electrical lights until they intersect, and you just proved in a court of law that the moon missions are fake with 1 picture. You see that? That's all it takes.
Was it
that and an open mind?
Right. Did the AI, was it specifically proving that this photo was fake, or was it a different, or was it?
It said every single Apollo picture it was shown was fake because of the backgrounds were fake.
Okay.
It can analyze the pixels and the geometric direction of every shadow of every rock in there. And there's something different a computer can pick up mathematically between the angles of the foreground where the real soil is and the background, which was video projection or still projection, and the angles went off or the pixels changed or something, the computer can pick it up. And it said every single Apollo picture it was shown had a fake background, meaning it was taken in a TV studio, which means they were on Earth, which means they didn't go to the moon. So there you go. That's the 5th proof. The smartest computer in the world that has a deep fake detector program that has never been wrong just said the Apollo missions were fake. And go to my website, Sibrel.com. I have a video that shows the original link in Russian to that story. If you click on it, a warning comes up saying if you proceed to find out that the AI just said the moon missions are fake, all the data on your computer will be stolen, and you'll be associated with child pornography.
Well,
that's how desperate they are to make sure people don't find out that the latest AI just said the moon missions were fake.
The stars in the background, or the lack of stars in the background, is that a component of?
Well, technically, it is proof that they didn't go, but I don't consider it one of the 4 concrete proofs.
Okay.
The 5th could be the AI. They argue that the exposure was set for the brightness of the moon's surface, which means the aperture was almost all the way closed, and therefore the faint lights in the background didn't show up. It does contradict a picture that NASA took on Earth with heavy atmosphere at sunrise of the space shuttle, where you see stars in the background and a bright foreground. But in any case, the problem is, why didn't they take any pictures of the stars by themselves? They would have had the clearest image ever taken of any stars in the history of mankind. They could have brought a telescope and put it on the moon, right? Because they weren't there, they couldn't do it. They couldn't fake the astrological position of the constellations accurately with the rotation of the moon, with the rotation of the Earth, with the rotation of the solar system, with the rotation of the galaxy. They couldn't fake it accurately. Therefore, they never talked about it. And even at their press conference, a reporter asked him, "Did you see any stars?" And Neil Armstrong says, "I don't remember." Really? You don't remember whether you saw stars more vividly than anywhere in the history of the mankind? I don't remember. You see, all they had to do is point the camera up, open the iris, and take a picture of the stars. But they never did that. They took a car to the moon, but not a scientific telescope, claiming that they're going to the moon for scientific research because they couldn't fake about it. They were told not to talk about it. They were told never to take any pictures of the stars. And of course, if you were there, that's exactly what you would do. If you went to Paris, Matt, I'm sure you would take a picture of you and your wife in front of the Eiffel Tower and probably 10 pictures of them. According to a NASA Apollo astronaut, the Earth was always right above the horizon of the moon, but there's never a single picture of the Earth over the horizon of the moon, huge like it would be, showing the continents. That's the one picture you would take with yourself with the Earth in the background. Not a single picture because they weren't there. They couldn't fake the Earth rotating. And then they'd have to fake the weather patterns that would match the weather satellites at the time. They couldn't do that. So they just didn't talk about it and ignored it.
So no photos of the Earth from the moon.
Only one up and now that's taken from an unmanned probe. So that's different. You can send unmanned probes to the moon like the Chinese did that won't die from the extreme radiation, but humans would die. And so that's maybe the sixth proof. We have a clip, which you can show, of Kelly Smith pointing out to the public something most people don't know, that about 1,000 miles above the Earth is a 30,000-mile thick field of radiation called the Van Allen radiation belt. My book, Moon Man, which I read myself in audio, it's Kindle or print. You can see all these clips at Sibrel.com. It's interactive. I write a chapter. I say, look, if you want to understand the next chapter, go to clip 1, clip 2. We have a clip of a NASA engineer saying the radiation belts are dangerous to humans, meaning deadly, and the technology necessary to go through them to the moon has not been invented yet.
My name is Kelly Smith, and I work on navigation and guidance for Orion. We are headed 3,600 miles above Earth, 15 times higher from the planet than the International Space Station. As we get further away from Earth, we'll pass through the Van Allen belts, an area of dangerous radiation. Radiation like this could harm the guidance systems, onboard computers, or other electronics on Orion. Naturally, we have to pass through this danger zone twice, once up and once back. We must solve these challenges before we send people through this region of space. We must solve these challenges before we send people through this region of space. We must solve these challenges before we send people through this region of space. We won't have astronauts inside.
So how exactly did they go to the moon? You see, that's why there's mannequins orbiting the moon. We have documents from von Braun saying it's impossible to go to the moon in one rocket.
There's mannequins orbiting the moon?
There were, allegedly, about a year ago. They said they promised in 2014 they're going to have people orbiting the moon in 2018. They were 100% behind schedule, and they only had mannequins orbiting the moon, not people, because they would die from the radiation. And then von Braun said originally, and we have his documents and a video of him saying it, it's impossible to go to the moon in one rocket. We have him saying it on camera. We have him saying it in documents that he wrote. He said you would have to first build a space station and do multiple fuel trips first. And Elon Musk said the same thing. His rocket is a few feet taller than the Saturn V Apollo rocket. And he says with that rocket, you'll have to make at least 8 fuel trips first before people can go to the moon. Von Braun said the only way you could go to the moon would be 3 rockets, each weighing 800,000 tons, taller than the Empire State Building, and the Saturn V was only a third as tall and only weighed 2,500 tons, not 800,000 tons. That's a difference of 30,000% times 3 rockets, you see? So there's a lot of inconsistencies that are supportive of that. But to me, the first proof that's concrete is shadows intersecting at 90 degrees from objects 5 feet apart. And then the second proof is just deductive reasoning. Because today, with 5 decades more advanced rockets and computers, the farthest that NASA can send an astronaut into space is 1,000th the distance to the moon. So what they're claiming is back in the 1960s, before microwave ovens and cell phones, when all the computer power combined at NASA headquarters was 1/1,000,000th the computing power of a cell phone, they sent astronauts ahead of schedule on the first attempt 1,000 times farther than they can send people today, even though they have 5 decades better computers and rockets. So what they're really saying is that for the first time in the history of the world, technology was greater in the past than in the future, which is a historic and scientific impossibility. Lindbergh flew across the Atlantic in 1927, 3,000 miles. Imagine 50 years later, 1977, nobody can fly across the Atlantic, and the best an airplane can do is only 3 miles. That's what they're asking us to believe. You see that?
I do. Yeah, that part is absolutely unfathomable. And you're right. It's almost 1,000 times farther from the ISS to where astronauts are going today. It's 1,000 times farther to the moon than where astronauts have been since 1972. And again, there's you're saying they've never been there. Totally open to that as a possibility. But it is shocking that we would have been able to do that in 1969, 1970, 71, 72, and we can't do it today. I mean, the Artemis missions have been postponed time after time after time, and we're attempting to get people past that 250-mile distance. It's about 400 kilometers to the International Space Station. It's 384,000 kilometers to the moon. It's it's shocking. It's absolutely, it makes no sense that we could do that in 1969 and that we're struggling so badly and so far over budget with the Artemis program to get people to the moon today.
They've said, presidents have said 8 times they're going to return to the moon in 5 years, right?
Right.
Clinton said it. Then you had Bush Sr. said it. You had Reagan say it. You had Bush Jr. say it. You had Obama say it. You had Trump say it. And some of them said it twice in 2 terms. They're going to return to the moon in 5 years. Never happened.
Right.
But somehow they can do it in 8 years with 1960s technology.
Right.
You see that? So if you postpone it, they've had 40 years since they've committed to doing it to return to the moon. And technically now they've had 5.5 decades to return to the moon. And they can't even go farther than 1,000th the distance. Do you see? It's as plain as day, as shadows intersecting at 90 degrees when they should be parallel if it's sunlight. It's as plain as day. You can't have 1,000 times greater technology in 1969 than today, and people will not accept the truth because of the glorious moon landings. Americans are first. That both Glenn Beck and Bill Maher are so proud. Americans were first on the moon. You see that? They're being played for suckers. They are defending the people they say they don't like, the corruptive people in the federal government. You see that? So those are the first 2 proofs. You can't have greater technology in the past than in the future, 1,000 times greater. We have shadows intersecting that can only happen with an electrical light. And then we have this footage we uncovered of them faking being halfway to the moon right in front of your eyes. Hold it here, right here. This is an excellent picture because, mind you, I had $1 million to produce this film. This film took 7 years to make. I spent 4,000 hours editing a 45-minute movie. That's like 40 hours a week for 2 years. I was producing the film under the theory it might be true that they faked it. There are a lot of things that didn't add up. The Soviets launched in the first satellite, the first animal, the first man, the first woman, the first spacewalk, first crew of 3, first of 2 crafts side by side, For every 100 hours we spent in space, they spent 500 hours. So much more advanced than we were. We weren't even close to them. They never went. Then the administrator of NASA, before this great accomplishment, right? He's about to be the CEO of NASA, putting men on the moon, and right before the first flight resigns, doesn't want to have anything to do with it. Then the two of the three astronauts in the most famous inaugural mission refused to give interviews. And I'm thinking, then there's the shadows intersecting. I'm like, something doesn't smell right about this. So I was producing it under the theory it might be true. And 3.5 years into the project, I pop in a tape. It says this on it: not for public distribution. And everything I got from NASA was pre-edited. In fact, there's very little footage from the first mission to the moon. In fact, of an astronaut actually standing on the surface of the moon, there's fewer than 20 pictures. And you can imagine how many pictures you would take in Paris. And of Neil Armstrong, the most famous man in the world at the time, first man to walk on the moon, guess how many pictures, still pictures, there are of him on the surface of the moon? 0. He refused to have his picture taken. Didn't want to have anything to do with it. That's why he only gives interviews under the direct order of the President of the United States on special anniversary occasions, right?
Why did he refuse? I mean, because he wasn't there, I guess.
Well, as best as I can tell, he was an honorable man. And when they asked him to fake the moon landing, he said, good luck with that, but count me out. But he was already the replacement of the first crew that we'll get into, who, according to their own relatives, was murdered for not cooperating. And so he couldn't publicly resign. People would ask too many questions. So they probably threatened his life, but seeing how he's a test pilot, flying planes that have never been flown before, that's pretty dangerous. I don't think threatening his life meant a whole lot to him. So then they threatened his family, you see, and he reluctantly participated. You can see his expression during the press conference like he's at the funeral of his mother.
Yeah, that was strange.
You can see his expression the day he's suiting up. He looks pitifully unhappy. And that's why he hardly ever talks about it, doesn't want to have a thing to do with it. And all this footage from NASA was pre-edited with a voiceover. I asked for unedited footage and got none until a whistleblower sent me this. It's an entire tape of unedited footage of one special effect shot. In fact, the original slate says test. That's a Hollywood term for special effect shot. And it's allegedly the blue Earth floating in space. They're trying to show to the audience 2 days into the flight. Mind you, this thing has a computer clock timestamp 2 days into the flight where they're supposed to be halfway to the moon. Neil Armstrong even says, you can show the clip, for the part that they intended to broadcast. This is Neil Armstrong calling in from 130,000 miles out. In fact, before he says that, he asks Houston, how far out do you have us? Well, he has a computer console right there that should tell him, but he's still in Earth orbit. So he didn't want to contradict the computer program that Eugene Krantz said was fooling all the people during a simulation. And we see this little blue Earth with allegedly space all around it. He explains to the audience there's only one window that faces the Earth and it's filled up with the TV camera, meaning to shoot the tiny Earth with black around it, you'd have to have the lens right at the glass of the camera. I mean, the lens of the camera right at the glass of the window. So if you want to play the footage, we have this little blue Earth that's allegedly them, now if you want to hit pause, this is supposed to be the Earth floating in space with the lens of the camera up against the window, and this proves that they're really far away from the Earth. We have the unedited version where the lights come up and you discover the camera is really at the back of the spacecraft. They've turned out all the lights, and this is a circular window outside of which it's filled with the Earth and Earth orbit. But it looks like the Earth floating in space. This is really the window of the spacecraft with the Earth outside of it from Earth orbit. The lights come up and you see they just lied about being halfway to the moon. And in addition to this, if you want to run it back a few seconds, not only do we have them faking this shot, we're going to want to hear this audio. We hear at the very beginning of the tape, NASA says, hey, the TV picture looks great. They didn't even get it themselves. It was screened somewhere else, but they said, we hear the TV picture looks great. Then there's dead air for 1 second, dead air for 2 seconds, dead air for 3 seconds, dead air for 4 seconds, and then a third party, not NASA, not the astronauts, says, talk. It's the CIA telling them, don't speak until we tell you to create a fake 4-second radio delay. That's on the tape too. Go ahead and play it so that Mac can hear the audio.
Okay, Roger, we're dropping in on Earth.
So yeah, if you play it even further back from the beginning, you hear NASA speak, 4 seconds of dead air, and then talk. You see? He's being told how to fake a 4-second radio delay because he's really in Earth orbit, only 250 miles above the Earth, so the conversation would be instantaneous back and forth. So they figured about 2 seconds to go out, 2 seconds to come back. The CIA had a stopwatch. He had an earpiece in. He hears NASA, but he don't answer right away. 1, 2, 3, 4, talk. And I'm like, whoa, what's this? And then I start looking at it because this is unedited. They only aired about maybe 10 to 20 seconds of it. I have an hour of them trying to get this shot right. They even insert into the window a little crescent piece of cardboard to make it look like the Terminator line between night and day. And the part that the public saw, it looks really good. I would have been fooled. Until the lights come up, you see them removing the Terminator line, and it's actually a 1-foot model using the window. They're faking being halfway to the moon 2 days into the flight. They can't walk on the moon the next day when they say it's a 3-day trip. And if they really went to the moon, why would they be faking any of it? And if they're faking being halfway to the moon, it's because they can't go halfway. They can't leave Earth orbit. Just like Von Braun said, all the fuel will only get you into Earth orbit. Just like Elon Musk said, you can't go from Earth orbit right away. You have to ferry fuel first. And the proof that there's mannequins orbiting the moon instead of people. They can't leave Earth orbit in 1969, as this proves, and they can't leave Earth orbit today. So if you continue playing this clip...
When we get to playback, we can sort of correlate what we were saying. Thank you very much.
So he just said playback. It was supposed to be live. But these private conversations, because we have the unedited version, they're talking about how they're faking it. Don't speak until we tell you to create a fake radio delay, and this actually isn't live, it's for playback later, after they had a chance to edit it and pick out the best parts. So,
shut out the sun coming in.
Can you say who gave you this video?
No, it's an anonymous whistleblower
Okay.
at NASA. Bill Casing thinks he knows who it was. So wait till you see, more of this shot, where the lights come up and it dawns on you. When I watch audiences watch this in theaters or in conferences, they gasp. What's her name? Candace Owens just gasped. I did. I'm like, wait a minute. That's not the Earth and space. It's the window. They're faking. Let me make sure I get this right. They're faking being halfway to the moon, which means they can't go halfway, which means they didn't go, which means, oh my gosh, they actually did fake the moon landing. This is the proof that even my critics agree is them faking being halfway to the moon from Earth orbit, which they would never have to do if they really went to the moon. This would prove it in a court of law. 2 NBC News directors agreed that this absolutely proves that they never left Earth orbit and therefore did not go to the moon. The first NBC News director refuses to air it for fear it will cause a civil war. The second one says, we're going to broadcast this nationwide. They fly me to New York, put me up in the Waldorf Astoria. They, showcase me describing it, and then they get a threatening phone call from the federal government threatening to pull their plug using the FCC, Gestapo, or whatever. And they say, sorry, keep your money. We got a threatening call from the government. We can't air this because it proves they didn't go to the moon. Can you imagine that?
Yeah.
2 NBC News directors agree that this proves they didn't go to the moon. My critics agree This is fake footage from the first Apollo mission. Why would any of it be fake if they really went?
The first Apollo mission.
Yeah. And then, of course, the last Apollo mission has shadows intersecting at 90 degrees, meaning they didn't go then either. Plus, they had identical equipment. So if one equipment can't go beyond Earth orbit, the clones of it can't go beyond Earth orbit either.
Interesting. Is that the entire video?
No,
Or
keep playing it, Ryan.
The lights
And
turn
wait
on,
till
right?
you see. Wait till you see it.
Well, we shut out the sun coming in some of the other windows into the spacecraft, so it's looking through the number one window, and there isn't any reflected light.
To my knowledge, there's
We
never
only
been a
have
cloud
one,
pattern that
window
went across half of the
has
Earth.
a view of the Earth, and
That's
it's
where they.
filled up.
Oh, sorry, I was talking over him, but you can play that again.
South America becomes invisible.
That's an arm getting in front of the window.
Beyond the Terminator or inside the shadow.
So that cloud pattern was going vertical and now it's horizontal. I guess they flipped the camera, I guess.
The ocean
Yeah.
with a definite blue cast. See white bands of major cloud formations.
So
across
he
the
said,
Earth.
I talked over it, but we only have one window that faces the Earth and it's filled up with the TV camera. But that's a lie. Now, here's the best part. This is the outtake. I think they actually hit stop on the VTR, the videotape recorder, but it was those mechanical buttons that popped back up and kept recording. That's a work light in the top left that they used to have a little bit of light. They turned off the lights so that the walls would be dark and it would look like space around it. Now here they are. They're about to remove part of the crescent insert in front of the window. That's Neil Armstrong removing that. And then the lights come up and you see the real position of the camera and they're really bright and near Earth out the window.
Now we're coming in.
You see that?
Can't quite make out who that
They're
is.
faking being halfway to the moon with a 1-foot model of the Earth using the window. It's a very clever forgery, but I have the unedited version showing them that they're faking it. That's what convinced me. When I saw that, I must have said, oh my God, about 50 times in 1 minute. I'm like, oh my God, they really did fake the moon landing. I just wept quietly. I'm like, wow, this is so sad that mankind can't tell the truth to one another, that our own government is murdering people to cover it up, embezzling this money, and deceiving people to this day. What a wicked thing to do. The truth has to come out, otherwise that wickedness prevails.
Let's talk about the murdering people to cover it up for a second. So who has been murdered?
Well, we know of at least 9 people who were killed because of this.
Okay.
I mentioned before that Fox was originally going to air A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon that you can see on the homepage for free of Sibrel.com, and then chickened out. And in their special called Conspiracy Theory, Did We Really Go to the Moon? It was a great film. They pointed out that there were 5 Apollo astronauts and backup crews who were being groomed to fake the moon landing that all had accidents within a 24-month period of one another. I mean, you run a business. If 5 of your employees had accidents here at work within 24 months, I think the homicide detectives would be all over the place until they found out what was going on. And then, according to the widow of the man who is going to be the first man to walk on the moon, her name is Betty Grissom. I interviewed her for 4 hours. Her husband, Virgil Grissom, was the most beloved of all the astronauts. He had a mishap in his Mercury capsule where the explosive bolts blew off when it hit the water. And it was considered to be an embarrassment and a failure. He was going to meet with President Kennedy. That was canceled because it was an embarrassment to them to have an accident. And at the press conference, he confided in the press corps. That's his widow, who I interviewed for 4 hours.
When did you interview her?
I interviewed her, I think, in 1999.
Okay. She has passed?
She has passed away.
Okay.
That's why I'm able to put this information in my book that's not in the film. This is the second to the last chapter called NASA's Greatest Fear. It's because of this, Matt. If they faked the moon landing and never killed anybody, maybe it's the devious part of me, Well, good for them. It's like in that it's like the people who tunnel, from the dry cleaner into the bank, get the gold. Good for them. That was clever, but not if they slit the throat of 3 guards with wives and young children, you see? And that's what they did. Basically, Virgil Grissom was going to be the first man to walk on the moon because he was most beloved by the public and the press corps. After that mishap, he confessed he made another mistake. And they're like, well, what mistake? He had in each of his front pockets like 4 rolls of nickels in one pocket and 4 rolls of nickels in another pocket. Bank nickels. To give to his son, who I also interviewed for 3 hours, who is convinced his father was murdered. And that way, he was in the 3rd grade or something. He could give these nickels to the school children, and everyone could have a souvenir of a nickel that's been in outer space. But as his capsule started filling with water, and he starts sinking with this extra weight in his pockets, he said, I guess that wasn't such a brilliant idea. The press corps laughed and was endeared to him. And then one reporter asked him, Matt, they said, were you afraid? And he said, of course I was afraid. And they're like, oh, he's so human. He's so real. They said, this is the guy who's most beloved. We're going to make him first man to walk on the moon. He couldn't understand why none of the equipment worked. In my film, I don't have the narrator pointing it out, but I show it for a few seconds. 3 or 4 weeks before they go to the moon, they have a little fake moon set in front of reporters, and Neil Armstrong is supposed to be practicing picking up the first lunar rock. He has a pole that NASA built with a bag on the end of it, and he has a fake little rock there for reporters to take a picture of him practicing. As he's picking it up, the bag breaks off the pole. They can't get that to work, much less life support systems, fuel, safety, and all of that. One of Virgil's last words were, during a ground test, they couldn't get a wired intercom to work between 2 buildings. You see that? They can't get a bag to stay on a pole to pick up the first moon rock. He says, how are we going to go to the moon if we can't talk between 2 buildings? He was preparing reports to Congress and the Senate, which his wife said were confiscated by the CIA from his house the day he died. They came in, took everything, and left without even informing her that her husband had just died. He was preparing these reports for Congress and the Senate to say, look, he said we're 10 years at least away from going to the moon, not 2. No one would fix anything because the higher-ups knew they were likely going to fake it, but had not at that point in time told the astronauts yet. He was getting so frustrated. All these reports, no one fixed anything. Verbal complaints, no one fixed anything. So a few days before he was murdered, without permission, he took a bunch of reporters up to the top of the rocket. His wife told me that morning he was a bit of a gardener, and he had in his backyard in Houston like an apple tree, an orange tree, and a lemon tree. She said he picked a lemon the size of a grapefruit to make a point. And he took a coat hanger, he clipped it, and he stuck it in there. He took a bunch of reporters to the top of the moon rocket, and he hung it on there with a coat hanger, said, this thing is a lemon, a piece of junk. The Pentagon officials were eating their TV dinners at home, seeing that on the evening news. They're like, this guy is a problem. So a few days later, they sucker him into a ground test. They reverse the door from opening outwardly to inwardly, which takes another 5 minutes. They pressurize it with 100% oxygen, where steel becomes flammable. His wife told me this, Matt. On January 26, 1967, he came home from work and said the following, Hon, for some strange reason, the CIA is all over the launch pad today inspecting the equipment. I've been here for 3 years, never seen the CIA. Why did they show up today? The very next day, he's dead from faulty equipment. It's his wife's opinion and his son's opinion, who's a 747 pilot, with 100% certainty. Their father, their husband, the man who was going to be the first man to walk on the moon, was murdered by the CIA because he was an Apollo whistleblower. Their opinion, not mine. So our country, first legal document is not the Constitution. It's actually the Declaration of Independence. And they say when any government becomes destructive of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it. What's the first one? Life. They're murdering their own people to cover up their crimes. In today's dollars, it costs $250 billion to pretend to go to the moon. Seeing how they only went into Earth orbit, they probably kept 3/4 of that. And then those CIA agents that murdered Virgil Grissom, Ed White, and Roger Chaffee, we paid their salaries, right? That was paid by tax dollars. Our tax dollars are financing our own deception, and our tax dollars are financing CIA personnel to murder Americans who are uncovering their crimes. I would say the United States federal government has become destructive of life. Then there's liberty, right? During this little thing we went through for the last 3 years. In California, if you had 5 people instead of 4 at your son's birthday party, they would kick down the door, drag you off to jail, and turn off your electricity. Now, I don't care if 9 out of 10 people are dropping dead from some illness going around. It's still your right to open your business under those circumstances or to go shopping under those circumstances. If one group of people is telling another group of people how many visitors they can have at their son's birthday party, then that's slavery, right? So they're a threat to life. First, they say you can't go to church, even though the Constitution says they will not establish a religion or prohibit the free exercise thereof. Then they say you can go to church, but you can't sing. First, they say you can't have a wedding. Then they say you can have a wedding, but you can't have any dancing. That is slavery. We have one group of people telling another group of people when they can go to church and what they can do at church. This country has gotten way out of control. And so my chapter in my book about this, Apollo 1 murder, is called NASA's Greatest Fear, because if the truth comes out that the moon landings were fake, and they indeed were, the very next can of worms they're going to have to face is the Apollo 1 fire. And the way I put it this way, Matt, is Bobby Kennedy Jr. has more access to the JFK files than Oliver Stone does. And it's his researched opinion with 100% certainty that the CIA murdered their own president. Robert McNamara, before he died, wanted to get something off of his chest. He said the public was against the Vietnam War, so we needed something like the Pearl Harbor. So him and the CIA got together and contrived an attack of a North Vietnamese ship on an American ship in the Gulf of Tonkin. He said before he died, it never happened. Congress passed a law to start that war based on a lie. Congress and the Senate didn't vote to fake the moon landing. They're being deceived by the CIA. That led to the death of 3 million people, including 58,220 of their own citizens. So my point is, if they're willing to kill their own president, if they're willing to kill 58,220 of their own people, I don't think they're going to have a problem faking a video image. You see that?
Yeah, no doubt about it. Yeah, it easily could have been faked. Did you record the videos with the wife and the son of?
No, the agreement was that I would take notes and that I would release that information after her death. And so that's what's in the book. And then so we have those 5 deaths of backup crews. We have the 3 deaths of the Apollo 1 crew, the crew that was going to be the first man to walk on the moon. These are just the ones we know of. So this is how the deaths and the murders and the proof ties in. First proof, shadows intersecting at 90 degrees, electrical light, scientifically proven. Again, you can't have 1,000 times greater space traveling capability with 1/millionth the computing power of a cell phone in 1969 than you do today. That proves it. We just showed the model of them using a 1-foot window to simulate the Earth floating in space. They're faking being halfway to the moon, which means they can't go halfway to the moon, which means they didn't go to the moon. And then lastly, we have an eyewitness. If I said in court, that 7-Eleven robbery, that guy, Matt Beall, did it, I'd bet my life on it. That's pretty powerful evidence, isn't it? And then if someone says it as they're dying, I've known about this robbery for years, and I just wanted to say that guy did it, right? courts consider a deathbed confession all the more powerful. So what we have is a gentleman by the name of Cyrus Eugene Akers, and we have a picture of him. He was chief of security at the Air Force's most secure base. Every branch in the military has like their special ops intelligence headquarters. He was in charge of the security at the special ops headquarters of the United States Air Force, Cannon Air Force Base in Clovis, New Mexico. As the man is on his deathbed, wanting to get right with God, and as best as we can tell, God will forgive your sins, even murder, if you confess them and renounce them and pledge not to do it again. Pretty graceful, right? He says, the first thing I need to confess is I'm a murderer. His son is there, who's my source. He's like, what? Dear old dad killed somebody? Who did you kill? He says, well, I killed a coworker at Cannon Air Force Base in 1968. The son is so alarmed, he brings in the military police to investigate. Kind of upset his dad because he wants to give this family closure. Did the guy just disappear? What happened to him? And then the military police come in. The son is there, who's my source, and he tells them who he killed. And then they ask him, why? Why did you kill him? He said, well, we both saw them film the first moon landing on a mock lunar stage inside two large airplane hangars that they took out the wall between them. They built the set over several weeks. President Johnson was there at a morbid curiosity the first of 3 days of filming, June 1st, 2nd, and 3rd of 1968. We saw them fake the moon landing at the base. I was in charge. My friend thought it was morally wrong. He was going to tell a reporter. I murdered him to cover it up. The man was given a list of 15 people who were allowed in to observe, given to him by President Johnson. He kept it as a souvenir. We published those names in the book, some of whom are still alive. Buzz Aldrin was on that list. He wasn't even in the spacesuit of the video images. They had their faces covered, but he watched as they did it. Now, here are some of the names. President Johnson, Neil Armstrong, Edwin Aldrin, Werner von Braun, the Nazi guy who the own State Department says was about to be thrown into jail for war crimes right before he died. Robert Emenegger, I never heard of this guy. I had to look him up. He was a science fiction consultant for the military. He spent all of his life saying the moon missions are real and aliens are real. I also have a book about how aliens are deception. Werner von Braun said they're going to fake an alien invasion in the near future. So he was there as a consultant. Eugene Kranz, flight director, who I've spoken to, who said they destroyed all of the technology, to go to the moon, all of the telemetry, all the original videotapes, what they would never do if they really went, but is exactly what they would do if they perpetrated a fraud. James Webb, NASA administrator, Joseph Kerwin, a future NASA astronaut, Thomas Paine, deputy administrator, Glenn Lunny, flight director, Christopher Kraft, mission control and founder, James Van Allen, who said originally that the radiation belts are 100 times a lethal dose. Now he says, there's no problem, right? Arthur Trudeau, Army intelligence, and a couple of people, as we can best tell, were with Navy and CIA intelligence, Donald Simon and Grant Norrie. These were the people who were there. We verified that Johnson was there. We verified that Robert Emenegger was there, of these people on the list. And so this is incredible information. Little side note, if you read my book, I go into great detail about how I was actually kidnapped by the CIA when I was at the doorsteps of CNN to give them the footage that we just saw of the fake photography. Drugged with true serum, I escaped. I peed in a cup to prove to the NBC News director I was drugged by this exotic drug. The lab was broken into in the middle of the night, and all that to say.
Let's get to that in a minute.
We'll get to that in a minute.
There's too much to unpack prior to getting to another thing. But so was the deathbed confession recorded?
It was recorded, and then the house with the videotape in it mysteriously burned to the ground.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
So if you go to Sibrel.com on the homepage, I have the eyewitness testimony of the son who was there describing his father's deathbed confession.
Is he still alive, the son?
He just died, but we have him on videotape. It's on the homepage of my website. He says, I lived right across from Cannon Air Force Base. My father was chief of security there, and my father hated lying, hated it. And so he was a man of truth. If he said this, then it happened. He described what his father told him, that for weeks they brought in concrete powder to simulate the lunar surface. They brought in the lunar module. They painted the background, matte black.
So Apollo 1 then was the first scheduled manned mission to the moon, and those 3 people died in this accident. And you're saying that the CIA was there and tampered with the container that essentially burnt them alive through pressurized oxygen.
Yeah, all the astronauts respected Virgil's criticism of NASA, at least privately. But there was a running joke saying they didn't want to stand anywhere near him in case he got struck by lightning. So because he was so critical of NASA and everybody knew that, if he had an accident by himself, it would all the more look like murder. So they killed 2 other guys along with him to make it look like an accident. And according to his wife, he said the CIA showed up the day before and, going into the space capsule, that the following day was a test, and he was burned alive inside of there with 2 other people. That fire was set by the CIA, according to his widow. They even have forensic proof that that was the case. So,
what is the proof?
Well, they have the record of the electrical voltage of the craft as it was consistent until right before the fire, it dipped down. So they believe some device was tapped into the electrical supply. It was activated by radio remote control, and it siphoned off power that they can show a record of, and then it ignited a fire. They normally wouldn't pressurize anything with 100% oxygen, but they did on that occasion. They reversed the door. They found a pile of rags dipped in flammable oil underneath his seat. They targeted him in particular. In the event they were able to get out of the fire, they wanted it to start there.
And the reason that they couldn't open the door is because the door was reversed and the capsule was pressurized.
Yes,
so
it was a very lengthy procedure to open up the door. And they burned alive probably within 10, 15 seconds.
Okay.
And there's nothing anyone could do. And it would look like an accident, and it would look like they didn't single him out in particular after his criticism. And it was then a warning to, the Neil Armstrong's crew with Michael Collins and Buzz Aldrin, cooperate or else.
Set us up here. Tell us what we're watching.
This is the son of the man who committed homicide at Cannon Air Force Base, who was present during his father's deathbed confession. And he was the one who brought in the military police, and he saw their investigation, and he saw them when they asked his father, why did you kill this person? And he said to cover up the moon landing fraud. He's going to describe what his father told him, the great detail about how they prepared the 2 hangars to make it look like a fake lunar set.
Perfect. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Gene Gilmore. My birth given name is Eugene Reuben Akers. I don't want any money for what I'm doing because hopefully this video won't come out until after my death. So I have nothing to gain, nothing to profit by telling you what I'm going to tell you. And a lot of what I'm going to tell you is available online until they see this video. And I'm sure things will start getting scrubbed. As well as moon photos. But anyway, my father in 1968 was stationed at Cannon Air Force Base in New Mexico. I made notes on my computer so that I wouldn't forget anything, because there's a lot of little things and stuff that I'd forget. So these notes were made a long time ago. The original recording that my father made on his deathbed was destroyed in a fire. So this is my deathbed confession, because now I'm dying of cancer. I've got cancer all over the place, and they don't know where it's coming from, and I don't know if they can stop it, but it don't look good. So I'm going to go ahead and make this video for Bart Sibrel. He knows not to do anything with it until notification of my death, for which my son will respond to that. Okay, like I said, in 1968, my father was stationed at Cannon Air Force Base in New Mexico. We lived in Clovis, New Mexico. He was in the military police for over 20 years, and on his deathbed in 2002, we made a recording of what happened. Now, I already told you what happened to the recording. But it doesn't matter, because all the facts are there, so it doesn't matter who's telling the story or whatever. I will, at the end of the video, I'll supply a picture of my father, his badge, the flag of when they buried him. I'll show you some photos of my dad. I was born in 1955. So in 1969, I was 14 years old. I vividly remember the Apollo 11 coming down, landing on the moon, and they're walking around and all that stuff. Anyway, I never questioned that until my dad told me what he told me on his deathbed. And then I started doing a little, nothing major, nothing, just surfing the web, I think they call it, surfing the web. And a lot of that information's right there on the web. I mean, it verifies the story that he told me. A good detective, a good one, would be able to uncover a lot more of the story that I'm getting ready to tell you. So, please have at it. I've never known my dad to lie. To get caught lying was worse than whatever it was you did to begin with. I remember going to school with long sleeve shirts on to hide the purple welts. You did not lie in our house, that's for sure. Dad had a really bad attitude towards lying. Excuse me again. Okay, anyway, this is the story that my dad told me on his deathbed. Project Slam Dunk was the name of this. President Johnson in 1968, okay? In Cannon Air Force Base in 1968, he said by the time he got there, that there was already 2 large hangars that were connected. There was hundreds of dump trucks that came in and dumped sand and stone, and cement powder was powdered over the top of all that to make it look like a lunar landscape. They had men that fashioned it into a lunar landscape, he said. Okay, I've never known my dad to lie, so this all took me by surprise. You know, what's that all about? So anyway, he said that in front of the airplane hangars was pole framing with large canvas tents that was concealing the inside of the staging area. Inside the staging area, on flatbed trucks, was uncrated the lunar lander that was reassembled back inside the hangars. All of the walls were painted flat black, and the ceilings as well. He was sworn to secrecy by the NSA, and they would put him in prison for breaking that oath. When Dad saw the moon landing on TV, he cried. He said he knew that what he had witnessed on TV was exactly what they recorded in that hangar. There was no reason for them to go flying around and everything. They had detailed high-definition photos of the landing area. There was no reason for them to go flying around to a different landing area that almost exhausted their fuel, except for drama, because everything had gone so smoothly. Nothing, you know, so it had to be something. Anyway, Dad was one of 3 guards that guarded the inside of the front entrance. There was a list of 15 people who could enter. No one else was allowed by order of President Johnson. And here is that list. And I gave it to Bart Sibrel as well. And he checked out a lot of these names, and he says he can verify a lot of these people and what they do. And I come across a couple myself. Anyway, President Johnson, Neil Armstrong, Edwin Aldrin, Werner von Braun, Robert Emenegger, Gene Kranz, James Webb, Joe Kerwin, Dr. Thomas Paine, Glenn Looney, Dr. Christopher Kraft, Dr. James Van Allen, General Trudeau, Lieutenant Colonel Donald Simon, and Grant Norrie. Now, the only 2 that I really have information on is Robert Emenegger. Apparently, he did a lot of video work and stuff for the Department of Defense. So the DoD did know him, okay? And the other one was Grant Norrie, Norray, I believe, was to the best of my dad's knowledge, was a like some FBI, CIA, NSA, who knows, something like that. Okay, President Johnson only showed up for the first day of filming. Filming lasted for 3 days, and the entire project was restored to original. In other words, the hangars were all taken apart, the sand was all removed, and so on and so forth. Okay. Dad said there was a lot of building going on at the base, so at the time, so sand and cement powder was never questioned. I can see how they could smuggle that all in within everything else that's going on. Since 2002, I have dug up, I already told you about that, the evidence for the moon landing that I have found. If you go to Google and go to Cannon Air Force Base website, they admit that President Johnson was there. The lunar lander was there. The astronauts were there. I also have verified some of the people on the list were there. I also verified there are a lot of building going on in the base, just as he had told me. And all of this was going on at the same time, on the same date. Dad told me all these things, father to son. He also told me not to ever tell anyone what he had said, but he said on his deathbed that he had to tell somebody before he died because it was just too important not to tell. I sure as hell wasn't going to tell anybody. Yeah, I feared for my wife and me and my son, and I'll tell you why. Ever since I contacted Bart Sibrel, I think they may be listening to his phone once in a while, because I never had any problems until I contacted him and told him my story. Now, people broke into my house 2 times. I was visited by men with black suits, and I was told in no uncertain terms to drop this whole project, not to say anymore to anybody, or me and my wife and my son could disappear. You take that pretty literally after everything that's going on. Well, so I stopped contacting Bart, and now I'm making this video that I'm going to send to Bart. Mr. Sibrel, excuse me. Bart's my brother, man. My brother in heart, my brother in Jesus, okay? Bart, being a good friend that he is, called the police for me and told them about the break-ins. The two detectives that came out and everything questioned me and everything like that, I didn't give them any information at all. At the time, I thought it was a test from them guys in the black suits. I didn't say crap. So all that went away and everything. But it definitely, the two guys in the black suits were not the two detectives that came out to question me about the break-ins. But thanks, Bart. But no, I don't want any help. I just want somebody to pick up where I left off and be able to prove with the information I've given. And I'm trying to give as much as I can because I know that once I die, I'm not going to be able to be asked any questions. So that's why I tried to give you a little backstory too. But that's about all I can think of. My dad, he raised me by the book. I know he didn't lie to me. And as I started seeing more and more of what he was telling me was true, I realized my dad wasn't lying. I lifted the lid off my dad's case, and you can see that his name is Cyrus Eugene Akers. He was born on July 17th, 1933. He died on September 28th, 2002. Here's his badge, and I wanted to see if I could get as close as possible so that you can read the numbers on the bottom, which are, okay, there it is. (07596). 07596. That's my dad. And it must have been a really early picture because he's only got 2 stripes, so that was back in the 50s, I'm sure. Probably not long after I was born. And there he is. That's my father. My dad, he raised me by the book. I know he didn't lie to me. And as I started seeing more and more of what he was telling me was true, I realized my dad wasn't lying.
Okay. Yeah, good stuff. Thank you, Ryan. So what is that? What's your reaction to that?
When I saw the video, it's just, to me, one more piece of evidence on the pile. So I didn't really think much of it, to tell you the truth. I had already known what he was saying in an interview I did over the telephone. And I think I had that DVD for a year or so, and then I thought, well, why don't I just upload it to the internet? And boy, the way other people look at it is different from me. I already knew they didn't go to the moon, and so, like I said, it was just one more piece on the pile. But to the general public, they were, really, alarmed that I even had this footage. Mike Adams of Natural News, I remember, called me up frantic. Is this for real? Is this for real? I'm like, yeah, it's for real. And the views were doubling, I think, every day until somebody, throttled the view count of it and, tried to suppress it. He seems genuine to me. I know when they instruct juries in court, they say, just because somebody's swearing to something doesn't mean they're telling the truth. People lie all the time. It's one of the 10 Commandments, don't lie, right? So you have to use your own judgment. Is this guy sincere? And I'd say absolutely, he's sincere. And I remember Bill Casey, my first source at NASA, who told me the moon missions were fake when I worked at NBC. And he said the entire thing was supervised by the United States Air Force. In fact, I had to go to my own archives of my interview I had with him. I was thinking, didn't he say the Air Force? And then sure enough, it was filmed at an Air Force base. And of all the bases, it was their Special Ops Intelligence Headquarters, where that man was chief of security of the Air Force's most secure base. The son said he lived right across the street, that his father would never lie. He hated lying, and the guy is literally dying when he gives this testimony. He said his father had to tell somebody because it's too important not to tell. And that's kind of how we started the interview. The faking of the moon landing is so much more profound historically than if they actually had gone. We have this great truth, how far America and mankind has fallen to fake the moon landing. And it's not part of the record yet. It's an important truth. We cannot keep burying it and expect for America or the world to make any progress.
Yeah. So this guy is describing his father's deathbed confession, and he's saying that there was this set that was created and that these were the people that were involved, and he's given us all this great information. But what are the other bits of information from the set or from the pictures or the video that we've been able to gather that in your mind proves that this is a television set that was created as opposed to actually being taken on the moon? I know that there's the stars, there's the shadows. What about, the flag potentially? Is there any mystery with how the flag is waving?
To me, that's incidental. People can argue whether a hand was on the flag and it's inertia from the moving of it. There are color video clips from a later mission where an astronaut's about a foot in front of it, and as he goes past it, it ripples because of the atmosphere.
It looks like there's a rod going through. There is a
rod going through it to hold it upright.
Yeah.
It's the color video footage. Occasionally, people are walking in front of the flag without touching it, and they seem to create a rift in the air as they pass it, and it's reflected in the corner of the flag waving in the wind when there's not supposed to be any atmosphere, on the moon. People can out-argue anything that they want to. To me, it's not that important of a clue. The fact that shadows intersect at 90 degrees is 100% certainty that it's an electrical light, which means they're not on the moon. You can't have greater technology in the past and in the future. It's never happened in the history of the world.
Got all those points. Yeah, for sure. No, it's good stuff. It's good.
Here's it right here.
Yep.
It's the clip.
Yep. And so anything about the dust or the ground itself that wouldn't occur on the moon, I thought maybe there was something from that stated that maybe as the pod took off back up into space that there was no exhaust plume or that the dust settled in a strange way.
Well, the lunar lander and ground tests created a pretty sizable crater because of the thrust of the engine. It was 10,000 pounds thrust of engine. And it created a hole so big, they were afraid that if it landed on the moon, it might fall into the hole it created. In the film, A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon, we even show a Norman Rockwell depiction, which shows this huge crater underneath the lunar lander. If you look at the pictures from Apollo 11, the alleged first mission to the moon, you see the lander just sitting there, and the soil right underneath the engine and the soil, to the right of the lunar lander look identical. That engine has never been fired. It was simply placed there.
What did Russia and China know about the moon mission? Did they know that it was fake, or did they think that it was real at the time?
I suspect that they found out over time through espionage that the lunar missions were falsified. I have a friend who works in the Chinese Space Center who says everybody there knows that the missions are fake. It's taught in public school that the missions are fake. And they have an agreement with NASA not to blow the whistle in exchange for space technology, that Congress passed a law making it illegal to give China any space technology. So the CIA is doing it anyway so that they won't have their moon landing fraud exposed by the Chinese. I suspect the same is true with Russia. Russian chess players are very good. And I could have a picture of a world leader with a prostitute and upload it to the internet and ruin that person's career, and then the picture is worth nothing. Or, if I'm shrewd, I could blackmail them year after year after year. At Sibrel.com, we have a clip of Vladimir Putin being shown the results of the AI that says the moon missions are fake. Doesn't look surprised at all. In fact, he looks afraid that the truth might come out and maybe he won't be able to blackmail the United States anymore. That would be another good reason for disclosure. We're being blackmailed because of the moon landing fraud. Tell the truth about it, and then that would stop happening. About 3 years ago, the former director of the Russian space agency publicly said in his retirement that the moon missions were fake. The very next day, Fox News calls me up and said they're scrambling to put a 1-hour TV special together about whether we went to the moon or not. They said, we want to be honest with you. We haven't read your book. We haven't seen your films. Irregardless, we will conclude that the moon missions are real to reassure people. I watched the special. They found one quote from one Russian scientist in 1969 who said, congratulations, and therefore their narration said, see, the Russians believe we went to the moon. They failed to mention that just 6 weeks earlier, the former director of the Russian space agency said the moon missions were real. So Fox News is not your friend. Just ask Tucker Carlson. Every show he did got 100 million views. If they were in the business to make money, he's the last person in the world they would fire. They fired him because he's saying things that they don't want the public to know. The same with RT. You think RT would run the story that Vladimir Putin was present when the AI declared the moon missions were fake. You can't even leave a comment on RT about the AIs proclaiming the moon missions are fake. So RT and Fox News and who knows what else are controlled opposition. This whole idea that Russia is an enemy and China is an enemy is a manufactured pretense of the military-industrial complex, the Pentagon. Otherwise, why would we need tanks and missiles that they're making all this money off of? China and Russia are competitors, and there's nothing wrong with wanting to win a competition, but they're not our enemies. We do trillions of dollars worth of trade with China every year. We have a lot of agreements going on with Russia, and they are absolutely blackmailing the United States, which is not a good thing. And so that would be a benefit of the government just coming clean about it. Those nations wouldn't be able to blackmail the United States anymore.
Yeah, so you're saying that Russia, China are blackmailing the United States because they know the truth now about the fake moon landing. And so I guess that would explain why Russia and China are saying that they have images of the moon landing site, right? Because isn't that one of the things that the debunkers or the detractors?
No, Russia or China have never said. This is the problem with people's memories.
Okay.
They don't remember things correctly. People think when they were a kid, they looked through a telescope and saw the flag on the moon. According to NASA, there's no Earth-based telescope that can resolve to any resolution on the moon. Russia and China have never publicly said that the moon missions are real. Their agreement is that they won't say that they're fake. Now, a lot of people say, well, we have these little pictures, from allegedly a NASA satellite orbiting the moon of a tiny little shadow or a little scratch on a picture. And they say, see, that shadow is the shadow of the lunar module, even though in a picture it's like 1/8 of an inch long. And these other little scratch marks, those are footprints. But wait a minute. NASA already faked a full body picture of an astronaut on the surface of the moon that was actually taken at an Air Force base in New Mexico. And you're trusting them to provide more proof that the moon missions are real? What do you think the Fox is going to say about stealing a chicken? Of course he's going to say he didn't do it. The only independent proof that they allegedly have is the Indian government has allegedly taken photographs of landing sites. But if you examine those closely, The landers that barely show up have 3 legs. The lunar module had 4. But the fact is, if you were really landing a probe or manned craft on the moon, it would have 3 legs so that it would always land level and not wobble. So it appears that the federal government landed probes there after the fact in order to give the appearance that there's something there. But we can't trust NASA because they're the ones who faked the pictures to begin with. So how could possibly any more pictures from NASA be proof of anything, you see? So then there's the argument that they have these reflectors that you can bounce a laser off of. Well, according to Scientific American magazine, and we post these articles on Sibrel.com, they were bouncing lasers off the moon in 1959 with no mirrors because the moon's surface is highly reflective. All they had to do is choose as the alleged landing sites these reflective surfaces, because by the time a laser goes from the Earth to the moon, it's like 5 miles across. So anything within that could reflect, and they could claim that it's, a man-made mirror that was put there. Plus, the Russians put a reflective mirror on the moon with an unmanned probe. So that's not really proof anyway. And then, of course, India could just be lying, or those photographs could have been intercepted, and fake photographs could have been put in their place. All you have to do is ask Manuel Noriega or Muammar Gaddafi or Saddam Hussein what happens when they stop cooperating with the United States government, right? So I think India's probably just participating in a hoax in exchange for, bribery or who knows what.
Okay. So there's no images that came from Russia or China of the land
that's a
sites.
misunderstanding.
Okay.
According to Chinese, you could say integrity or cultural integrity, they don't want to lie. They've never said the moon landings are real, but they've also never said that they were fake. So that's the way that they, choose to participate right now. They are blackmailing the United States. The CIA is madly in love with China. The puppet of the World Economic Forum, Trudeau, I think the gentleman in Canada, he was asked, what's your favorite country? He says, I love China because they're a dictatorship. Oh, I wish we could do what they could do. I mean, come on. So the CIA and China are madly in love with one another. Whether or not this thing in Wuhan had anything to do with the CIA and China working together, that's probably the case. We help them, they help us, and the idea that we're enemies with them is simply just not true.
Okay. So what are we looking at here then?
Well, I believe these images are allegedly of the Indian probes of the alleged lunar lander. Again, these are photographs that can be intercepted by spy satellites where the original picture, there was nothing there, and the CIA inserted fake photographs in these transmissions, or India could just be accepting a bribe or blackmail for providing these images. A photograph of men on the moon has already been falsified. They were falsified in 1969. So a picture allegedly of a man or a manned vehicle on the moon is not proof, because we have all those pictures of allegedly a man standing on the surface of the moon that an eyewitness says was actually filmed in a mock lunar set in New Mexico. So we can't, trust NASA's proof that these are pictures on the moon, and we really can't trust nations who the United States could easily topple their governments if they don't cooperate with the fraud.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you can't trust NASA. I completely agree. I mean, the images of Mars have been proven to be highly photoshopped. A lot of those were taken on Earth and added an orange filter to them. And
they match up to Greenland perfectly, which makes
exactly.
I sent Joe Rogan a text. I said, look, you think the face on Mars and the pyramid on Mars and the square on Mars is proof of aliens? They're coming from the same people who faked the moon mission. They want us to believe in aliens. Trust me, we've only had one whistleblower come forward in 56 years about the moon landing fraud. There would be no congressional hearings about UFOs if they wanted to keep it a secret. The fact that they're, quote, leaking stuff out is only for it to sound tantalizing and give it street credibility. This guy going around Fox News saying, aliens are real. They've been, bodies recovered, spacecraft are recovered. When they press him on the issue, where did you see the aliens? Did you see the spacecraft? And he's like, well, no, but people in the government told me they exist, and somehow that's considered credible news. The fact is, the man who faked the moon landing, Werner von Braun, said before he died that the United States government is planning on faking an alien invasion. I wrote a book about this. It's also an audio that I read, Kindle and print at Sibrel.com, that goes into how the government is planning on faking an alien invasion. That's why they have the face on Mars and the pyramid on Mars. I believe they're fake pictures, just like a fake picture of an astronaut on the surface of the moon. If they didn't want us to see those things, we would not see them. The fact that we see the face on Mars and the pyramid is because they want us to see them, which means they want us to trick us into believing in aliens from outer space. The fact is, radio telescopes have been pointing in every direction of the universe for 50 years. There hasn't been one radio signal from anyone. Oddly enough, the truth is the exact opposite of what the government wants us to believe. Life in the universe is only on Earth. That's it.
So no aliens. Not open to the idea that life exists outside of Earth.
I don't think so, because the science proves that there's nothing there. If there's an advanced civilization that can do space travel to come here and visit us, an alien craft, I'm sure they use radio signals to communicate with one another. There's not a single radio transmission found in 50 years, pointing in every direction of the universe, 24/7, 365 for 50 years, zero. There are no radio transmissions coming from anywhere except from Earth. We're the only ones here. If you believe in the Bible, there's an odd scripture, Revelation 21:3, that indicates that life is only on Earth. It says that when the new heaven and new earth is made, God will personally dwell with us. Well, the Bible says on 4 occasions that God does not show partiality. So if there's life on other worlds and he's dwelling with us and not them, then he's showing partiality. The only way he could dwell with us and not show partiality is if we're it. And what a surprise, it's the exact opposite of what they want us to believe. Last time I was in a hotel flipping through HBO, 3 of the 10 movies available were about aliens from outer space. They really want us to believe in aliens. And if the guy who faked the moon landing says they're going to fake an alien invasion right before he died, I suspect that's why they're doing all this disclosure and leaks to make it sound credible and tantalizing. But obviously, the government can't be trusted. You want us to believe in aliens? Tell the truth about the moon landing. Maybe we'll believe the next thing you have to say.
So with 200 billion stars in our galaxy and 200 billion galaxies in the observable universe, I mean, is it more of that's guiding your your perspective on there not being life anywhere else? Is that more of a biblical religious thing?
No,
or is it?
I just found, because I've read the Bible so many times, I happened to notice that, and that's a biblical. But I've always thought that seemed a little bit odd. Scientifically, the odds of there being life anywhere in the universe is really zero. So many things have to be in place for us to be having this conversation. Everyone knows that, of course, the Earth has to be the right distance from the sun. A few more people know that the sun has to be the right place in the galaxy, and so forth and so on. But then there's the DNA, the atom, the electron, that we have to have helium, and helium has to be discovered in order to have technology and an intelligent life. Life being here in the form that it is like winning the Powerball lottery 20 times in a row. It cannot happen by accident. People don't realize, but evolution is the exact opposite of logic, because it says a lower form of life made a higher form of life, which is saying something without a brain made a brain. You see, the problem is mankind has become so arrogant, if they can't comprehend an eternal being, they assume there must not be one. Where my golden retriever can't comprehend a car engine, I could spend its whole life explaining the alternator, the engine, or even a simple spark plug, talking about it for 10 years, and won't understand it 1%. But does that mean it wasn't designed by a higher power? So we are made in God's image. We are gods. We can take away life with forethought. We can create a life with forethought. Animals can't do that. Just because we can't comprehend the meaning behind it doesn't mean it's not true. Now, about 20 years ago, they did a study called the Eve Project, where they took DNA from all nationalities on Earth, from Eskimos and Swedes and Africans and whoever else in between. And using new DNA technology, they're able to go back in time, and they concluded scientifically that every human that ever lived, is alive, or will ever live came from one woman, just like the Bible said. No one before her, no evolution, suddenly appeared, boom, out of the blue. Well, the people who run the world don't want mankind to believe in God, then they'll repent of their sin, which they capitalize off of, and of course condemn people, and they die younger, which they want us to do. So how can they explain that? So they came up with this theory a few years ago. I thought it was a one-time TV show, Ancient Aliens. Apparently it's like year after year. And so what they're saying is, okay, all humans came from one woman. She suddenly appeared, no evolution. We'll give you that. The science, we have to admit, that's what the DNA says. But no, there's no God. We were made by aliens. They never asked the question in 3 years, 150 episodes that I would ask as a third grader. Okay, if we're made by aliens, then who made the aliens? And it gets even more interesting when you realize in the book of Isaiah, it says that Lucifer, a fallen angel, wants to dethrone God and take credit for creation. See, according to the top 2 UFO researchers, which is Jacques Vallée and Robert Hynek, UFOs are real, but they're not from outer space. They're from Earth, and they're demonic. So if an alien is really a fallen angel who's lying about where they come from, how can you prove or disprove whether they come from a place thousands of light years away? So if fallen angels are really aliens, and they're saying we were made by aliens, and the fallen angel leader is Lucifer, what they're really saying is that mankind was made by Lucifer instead of God. And if you look at the World Economic Forum, the billionaires who run the world, who boast, they appointed Trudeau in Canada. They appointed the president of France. They appointed the prime minister of the UK in their logo. And you can show this later, Ryan. This is $1 billion organization that can spend $1 billion on a logo if they want. You have World Economic Forum. All 3 words have an O in them. And there's a half circle going through these off-centered O's that form a 6, a 6, and a 6. Google's logo, 666. CERN's logo, where they're trying to release creatures from another dimension, 666. Show that again. It's just absolutely fascinating. The Illuminati is known for saying what they say is hidden in plain sight. You see the Owen World, the Owen Economic, the Owen Forum, and the line going through, forming a 6, a 6, and a 6. Hidden in plain sight. Their chief spokesperson said, and their CERN, 6, 6, 6, trying to let demons out through another dimension. The Bible even talks about that in the book of Revelation. You see this? They say, their chief spokesperson, don't obey Jesus, don't obey the Bible. They never say there's no God. They never say there's no Lucifer. They literally worship Lucifer. And that's what my book, Aliens from Planet X, is about. A rogue planet may come by the Earth in the near future that is desolate with no life, but they will claim as misdirection that when the aliens appear, which have been here all along, they'll claim it came from this planet passing by that could be part of the alien deception. So who knows what we've got ahead? I know that's a little bit off target from the moon landing, but it's still the same people. The people who killed Kennedy are the people who faked the Gulf of Tonkin, are the people who faked the moon landing. They're the people who likely did 9/11, who did this little thing for the last 3 years. When a bank robber, like I said, gets away, it just emboldens them to keep doing it, and keep doing it. And that's why they're so afraid about the truth about the moon landing fraud coming out. They say to cover up the witnesses of the Kennedy assassination, they killed 200 people, right? Can you imagine? And maybe 9/11, if that was really done by Americans, which it appears it was done by traitors in America, that's 3,000 people dead. We know of 9 people who died about the moon landing fraud. Maybe you can just guess, maybe another 5 or 10. So fewer people than any other conspiracy, but it's the one that will upset the public the most. They were taken for suckers, you see? And if they find out about that, they will never trust the current system ever again. It's the best tool to bring down corruption in the federal government. That's why they're so afraid for the truth to come out. You have the Russian former space director, as soon as he retires and is allowed to say it, he can't say it when he's director because of blackmail. But as soon as he retires, first thing out of his mouth, the moon landings are fake. Fox News calls me up the next day. They do a special about it. They're not going to read my book. They're not going to watch my movies. They don't care if I prove that it was fake. They're doing it to convince people it was real. You see how afraid they are for the truth to come out? The link to the AI story, it says the data on your computer will be stolen and you'll be associated with child pornography. If you find out the truth that the smartest computer just said the moon missions were fake, they know it. They know if the truth comes out about the moon landing, it will bring down all the corruption in the government. That's why they're trying so hard to have the truth about the moon landing fraud not come out. And if the president, whoever they are, really wants to end corruption, they could get the support from both political parties. Just show them that the moon landing was faked. They were taken for suckers. They killed their brethren to cover it up. They embezzled an equivalent, of thousands of dollars from each taxpayer. That will get Republicans and Democrats united for reform. No other tool is as powerful as telling the truth about the moon landing fraud to make that happen.
Why don't we get back to the moon landing conversation? What was it when you were abducted by the CIA and given this truth serum? Can you paint this picture for people and tell people exactly what happened?
Yeah, I was producing the film under the theory it might be true. And I guess it was like some black Americans who thought, we'll never have a black president in our lifetime. And they were, fortunately wrong. It did happen. It did prove America had overcome racism, at least by 51%. And so I thought we'll never have any proof in our lifetime that whether we went to the moon or not. Well, I was also wrong. Because when I popped in that tape and it said, do not show to the public, and I hit fast forward, and it's like the same shot for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, I rewind it. Then I hear talk, a third track of audio of the CIA asking them to fake a 4-second radio delay. And then the lights come up, and it's not the Earth. It's a 1-foot model of the Earth. And then it dawns on me, they really did fake the moon landing. I call up my source who worked at NASA for 6 years during the Apollo program. Second highest security clearance to von Braun. He said he read a memo from von Braun to the Pentagon that the odds of going successfully on the first attempt are 1 in 10,000. So he said they bluffed, like in poker. So he was my go-to guy while I'm making this movie. And I call him up frantic. You're not going to believe what I found. They really didn't go to the moon. And he says, well, Bart, I told you. And I'm like, no, you don't understand. They really didn't go. It's like, well, Bart, I told you. I said, no, you don't understand. It's like, well, Bart, I told you. He had told me over and over again for years, but I'm like, I need convincing, and I got it. And I was panicked. So during that phone call, there's this screech. And I could hear him, but I can't understand what he's saying. He can't understand what I'm saying. I'm like, don't sleep where you slept last night. We are in trouble. I had a blind roommate, a toddler son, and proof in my house that they actually did fake the moon landing. Proof that 2 NBC News directors agree with proven in a court of law that they did not go to the moon. And I'm like, what have I gotten myself into? Now the phone call's being interrupted. I copy the tapes. I put them in safe houses. I go to church that night, and it was a Wednesday night. We met in like a high school gymnasium across the street from this, big wave pool that closes at sundown. And out of the 300 or so people there, I'm like one of the last 2 people leaving. I'm like, what do I do? And they're like, you've bitten off more than you could chew. You need to drive like a bat out of hell to CNN and pass it on to your friend there because you're in deep trouble. And so like I said, 300 cars or so had gone past the wave pool, which was at that point closed 2 hours ago. And when I go past it, there was a van backed into the driveway, backed in, ready to pull out. And he didn't pull out when any of the other cars went by, but he pulled out when I went by. I'm like, oh, that guy was waiting for me. And I stopped in the middle of the road and said, I'm not going anywhere. I got all night. I'm not going to move an inch until this guy's in front of me. So I look in my rearview mirror, and he stopped back there, and I'm like, I'm not going anywhere. And after maybe 2 minutes, he's literally just stopped behind me in the middle of the night. He says, oh, I guess I made a mistake, pulled out too quick. Oops. So he passes me. Then I remember the book, The Art of War, Know Your Enemy. So I follow him. He gets on the parkway, Briley Parkway, going to town. I get on the parkway, going toward town. 2 lanes one way, medium, 2 lanes the other way. I want to take a look at this guy. Who is this guy who was waiting for me the day I find proof that they didn't go to the moon, the day my phone call's interrupted? And I pull up alongside of him, and he looks like, as best as I could describe, I've never seen this look in a human being before until this little event started happening. You ever see the footage of the great white shark and they hang a piece of meat over the side of the boat and it leaps out and gets it? And you see that big eyeball, that glassy eyeball? I say in that eye, no one is home. It doesn't care if it's your mother, a piece of meat, your daughter, your dog, it's going to eat it. It has no compassion. That's how this guy looked. It was the scariest. I've never seen a human being look like that. He would kill me and go home and have a nice fried chicken dinner and not think about me tomorrow. And as soon as we established eye contact, everything on my car died. The lights went off, the engine stopped, and a friend in the military told me they zapped me, EMP from a satellite or something. They disabled my car through an electronic beam of some kind that disabled the electrical system. So I'm coasting to the side of the road. This guy passes me, meets up with 2 other cars, and then the 3 cars are on the other side, looping around to my side. So I'll cross over, they loop around again, I cross over, they loop around again. And I'm frantic. I'm standing in the middle of a highway of 60 mile per hour trying to flag somebody down. A car's going by me. No one will stop, which is pretty sad, isn't it? A guy obviously in desperate need of help, and no one will stop because they're afraid. Except a cab driver looking for a fare. So
he was probably afraid too, but he stopped for you.
Yeah. So I'm on the phone with the police, and I say, I need to meet up with you guys. But I'm not going to tell you where I'm going to meet you until I'm 1 minute away because I know they're listening to my phone calls. And so I say, it's at the Exxon at 12th and Broadway. It's super bright turbo lights, I call them. They meet up with me there. I show them the huge Betacam tape, my meteor credentials, my ID. And they say, well, unless those people are right behind you now, there's nothing we could do. You need private security. Yeah, that's a great suggestion. So I hire a cab to drive me to CNN at Atlanta. And while my friend, I think, came on duty at 10 in the morning, and we get there at 6 in the morning. So we stay in a hotel. And as we're leaving, pulling out to go to CNN, all of these cop cars pull into our hotel, and they stop a taxi in front of the hotel. They stopped the wrong taxi. They were after us. I'm like, go, 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 go. Now, I don't know how the CIA works, but I would, to protect myself, I say, what would I do if I were them? Well, if I were them, I would have people on the payroll in every city in America with 100,000 people or more. And Nashville's, 500,000 people at the time. So, and what better people to be on the payroll than police, right? Who are, a lot of them are Masonic members and all that stuff. And then they do these little side jobs, right? So I get to CNN, and again, surrounded by the police on the sidewalk as I'm about to go in, one of which was a captain. And I figure these guys don't know why they were told to stop me. Maybe they were told I've got a videotape of President Clinton with a prostitute or something like that, and we don't want to embarrass the president, who knows what. So I tell them, I said, look, here's my NBC credentials. Here's my, super big broadcast quality Betacam videotape. And I say, you know what's on here? It's the crew of Apollo 11 faking being halfway to the moon, proving they didn't go to the moon. One of the 3 officers is just like shocked. And I'm like, am I under arrest? They don't answer me. Am I free to go? They don't answer me. The cab driver's like, let's go. And I don't want to involve him. I said, go save yourself. So he heads off one direction, and they didn't say I couldn't walk away. So I walk away around the corner of CNN. And as soon as I'm out of their sight, I take off as fast as I could. Back then, I was a little leaner than I am now. And I'm at an alley, and I'm like, I need to know which way to go. It's like a crossroad in an alley. And I'm spending like 1 second too many deciding which way to go. And at that moment, I'm surrounded by these motorcycle cops, an unmarked white van, and they immediately take the tapes, they handcuff me, and I hear them say behind me, where's the thing? And the other officer says, well, what thing? I mean, not what thing. I thought he had the thing. No, he has the thing. Oh, here's the thing. I'm like, oh my gosh, what is that? It looked like a hospital band, you put on when you visit the hospital, except it had nothing on it. And it's right around my wrists, you see, where it was some sort of drug that was absorbed through my wrist. The guys are handling it with rubber gloves. Fortunately for me, right as this was happening, a lawyer walked out. I saw his little sign. He had a back alley door so he could claim on his business card CNN Center, even though it's like this 100 square foot office, for who knows how much money. And I'm like, hey, I want to hire you. You're a lawyer. You're hired. I'm a journalist. I'm being illegally arrested, and the cops are, freaking out. And so I'm not sure what happened, but he might have saved my life. So they put me in an unmarked van that was like pitch black. I mean, it's just hard to do, around, noon almost. And in there's a guy like babbling, like speaking in tongues, I guess to confuse me or something or disorient me. The drugs are so strong, I start throwing up. The next thing I know, I'm in really bright light outside. They get out a clipboard and they start asking me all these questions. Where's the original tape and blah, blah, blah. I told them anything they wanted to know.
Do you know where you were outside?
I was somewhere in Atlanta. I'm not sure where. But they had it ready. All these questions they wanted to ask me.
Why do you think they took you out of the van to ask these questions?
Well, that's, that the whole thing would take, maybe 3 hours to tell this story. I'm trying to jump to the most important parts. But basically, I wanted to say that you don't have to torture anybody. This whole waterboarding thing is probably just vengeance. I mean, you could write Osama bin Laden's mother a check for $1 billion. She'll forfeit one son to save the other 9. And you could give anybody what they gave me, and they'll tell you anything they want to know. I was in La La Land. I thought they were angels or something like that. But all this to say, I ended up escaping their custody.
After the drugs wore off?
Or in the process thereof.
Okay.
Yeah. And I made my way back to Nashville. I had all these, back then you needed money for the payphone, but I had all these codes memorized how to make long-distance calls without any money. I called somebody I knew in Atlanta to pick me up. And anyway.
How did you get away from them all drugged up?
That's another long story. There's 2 chapters in the book that goes into great detail about this. But I did mention over our lunch that there were 2 good guys in the government who, as best as I can tell, because one of them had on a watch that said United States Marines. And I think they were with an organization called the MCIA, Marine Corps Intelligence Activity, who played a part in rescuing me. And so when I make my way back to Nashville, I know I've got this exotic truth serum drug in me. So I say, I got him. So I pee in a cup. I give it to a friend to put in a lab in his name, thinking I can outwit the CIA, right? Oh, by the way, how many CIA agents does it take to screw in a light bulb?
One.
Well, I could tell you, then I have to kill you. So anyway.
You got to stop saying you're going to kill me. It's freaking me out.
I'm sorry. Okay.
Christians have been doing that to non-Christians for a long time.
Okay, I'm sorry about that one. So I meet
some
with my
generational
friend
trauma
a few
there.
days later to get these lab results.
Yeah.
And he said, well, there was a problem at the lab.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, what problem? He says, well, they had a break-in over the weekend. And I'm like, well, so what? He says, well, funny thing, the only thing stolen was your urine sample. And the people at the lab were like, we don't know who you are, but please take your business elsewhere. So I almost had them, and somehow they figured out that I had peed in a cup, given it to him. They somehow knew all of that. So that was kind of the wackiest of adventures. They knew I had the tape because they were listening to the phone calls, but they hadn't seen it yet. And they wanted to see it before CNN got it. Now, it's in the film on the homepage of Sibrel.com. We just showed it. You can see that. Like I said, there's a guy who said if an astronaut confessed it was fake, he'd still think he walked on the moon anyway. People see this footage. Some people are convinced, some people aren't. Most people are convinced. My critics say it is them faking being halfway to the moon, but somehow they justify in their mind they win anyway. I don't know. The film is out. I should be okay now. But since the film came out, I was put in touch with the son of Cyrus Eugene Akers. And then some of those two good guy type of people asked me to call a couple of people on that list before I published their names in the book, which I was extremely afraid to do. And they're like, we got your back. Haven't we taken care of you all this time? These good guys, whoever they are in the government. I said, okay. And then I was so afraid to do it. I mean, I thought I would be slitting my own throat. Letting two of these people on this list know I have that information, that they were there at Cannon Air Force Base before I published the book. I'm really afraid. Well, the most repeated commandment in the Bible, 365 times, is do not fear. I said, I'm not going to live in fear. I called them. Well, a few days later, my source's house was broken into. All the stuff about his father, being there for the moon landing fraud was confiscated. 2 days after that, he's literally met face-to-face with government agents who threatened to kill him and his family if he talks to me ever again about his father's participation in the moon landing fraud. So my guess is the good guys wanted me to call those people because they're spying on their phone conversations. They want to know which agents they called, what department, who broke numerous federal laws and the Constitution, threatening citizens simply for exposing government corruption. So it looks like there's like a good guy, bad guy civil war going on underneath the radar in the United States. In the last 2 or 3 weeks, I personally drained my bank account, sending out $1,000 worth of my own book to all the department heads of Trump, CIA director, deputy director, FBI director, vice president, president, Tulsi Gabbard, press secretary, and anybody else I can think of, in the hopes that they will see, as embarrassing as it is to admit that the moon landing fraud did happen, it's worse to ignore it. Because that means the evil people won. That means we're teaching school children and college student lies, and we're still propagating the lies, which is endorsing them. They need to not live in fear either. This is the most powerful tool to bring down the corruption, is to show the public how bad it has become. They stole your money. They killed your neighbors to fake the moon landing. They said you were suckers. You see, according to the NBC News director, that will outrage the public more than anything in order to demand reform. So disclosing the moon landing fraud is a really good tool to get rid of corruption in the government.
Why do you think you're still alive?
Well, divine protection. I think God appreciates it when someone risks his life for what is right. And I think I've had divine protection. Plus, Those people who, as best as I can tell, are in marine intelligence, literally rescuing me in the middle of these misadventures, and apparently still have my back. We're in communication in certain ways, and they asked me to call these people. They're apparently, I'm just guessing, tracking who they call, the bad guys calling the bad guys to see who's, not doing what's right in the federal government. Why the truth hasn't come out yet, I don't know. But I think from a spiritual point of view, my hope is it will come out just for our benefit. It's like, you go to the doctor for an x-ray of your knee, they accidentally x-ray your stomach, and you find out you have this huge tumor there. Don't you want to know? Don't you want to know that the government faked the moon landing? Don't you want to know how bad it is? That's the only way we can get better, is to admit our fault. They want to do a house cleaning, so they say. Well, what do you do when you have company over? You clean your house, and what's part of cleaning the house? Taking out the trash. And how do you take out the trash about a lie? You tell the truth about it. So if the truth makes us free, then lies make us slaves. You can say who shot JFK, who shot, RFK, but if we still are telling the lie about the moon landing, then we're still slaves and not free.
Yeah. Why do you think that it's not one of those things that's being kind of pursued today? Because the government, Trump is trying to say that he's very open to the truth about the JFK assassination. He's open to making that stuff public. He's open to the UFO phenomenon and the UAP phenomenon and attempting to make that public. Several other things. Why do you think that the moon landing is not mentioned in that context yet?
They consider it an embarrassment if the truth comes out.
Okay.
It was printed on coins. It's 50-cent pieces from the 70s.
You think it's as much of that as that they just don't know, or they don't believe?
Oh, they know.
Yeah.
One of the first things that Trump did when he became president, you know what it was? He had a moon rock in the Oval Office. He made it leave. He said, remove that from the Oval Office. Oh, he knows the moon missions are fake. Elon Musk knows the moon missions are fake. And I think they're perhaps will start dealing with it. They're afraid it will be embarrassing. But telling the truth about a mistake is actually what brings government trust back. Kennedy was the most popular president, at least statistically, according to public polls, in the 20th century, because he said, this is my fault. This is my fault. I made a mistake here. I made a mistake here. So that could be done again, and that would restore public trust by telling one of the worst things that they've done.
You mentioned moon rocks, and Ryan, if you could try to pull up or just ask GPT what Trump said about the moon rock. I'm curious to understand his exact quote on that and how he asked it to get out. But part of the reason why people don't think that the moon landing is fake is because there's this story about them bringing back 842 pounds worth of moon rocks, and now these moon rocks are on display in museums, and they've been studied scientifically and given to dignitaries. I know that there was the one rock that was supposedly misidentified or mislabeled in a museum, and it was given to some foreign dignitary, and they tested it.
It wasn't mislabeled. That'd be a more relevant clip to bring up first rather than Trump kicking out the moon rock from the Oval Office.
Yeah.
Neil Armstrong said out of his own mouth, he saw a rock on the surface of the moon. He picked it up specifically for the Prime Minister of the Netherlands, put it in his pocket, chain of custody, brought it, gave it to him. They sealed it in a box and immediately put it in a museum, a clear box, and there you go. The curator of the museum apparently saw my movie, A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon, and goes, never thought about that. And in the middle of the night, opened the hermetically sealed container they presumed would stay sealed for all time, put it under a microscope, and it's a piece of petrified wood. It looks out of this world, but unless trees are growing on the moon, it's a fake moon rock. So the search would be Dutch moon rock proves to be fake. So no one asked the question, if the moon rocks are fake, what about the moon mission? In fact, when the space shuttle went to the highest altitude ever, which was about 650 miles below the Van Allen radiation belt, they were still close enough to it that they could see radiation with their eyes closed as sparks of light. Imagine if there was a nuclear meltdown 650 miles away. We face that direction, close our eyes, and we see sparks of light from the radiation. That's pretty strong. So CNN said the following: the radiation belt surrounding the Earth is more dangerous than previously believed. So how could an astronaut crew 650 miles away from it know more about it than crews that allegedly went through it? More dangerous than previously believed from 650 miles away of the radiation. You see, no one asked the question, how can they know more about it than the Apollo astronauts? How, if the moon rocks are fake, what about the moon missions? You see?
But it's not that the moon rocks are fake. So let's get back to the rocks for a second. So we know that one moon rock is not a real moon rock. And the question
that Neil Armstrong personally said he picked up and had complete chain of custody before he gave it to the Prime Minister of the Netherlands, who put it in a box and was opened, 35 years later.
I'll take your word for that. Yeah. So I didn't.
Well, the article says so.
Know that detail, but good. Yeah, I'm not arguing with you. I'm just trying to establish facts and truth. So that one moon rock is false, but they brought back 842 pounds of moon rocks, and this stuff has circulated the Earth, and it's been scientifically tested and looked at.
Not really, and there's a couple of problems with that. It's illegal. It's a federal violation to be in possession of a moon rock. Even the smallest particle you are not allowed to have, because you could put it under a microscope and maybe discover things about it. The fact is, von Braun took an unusual holiday 6 weeks before they went to the moon for the first time. You would think he would be practically sleeping at NASA 24/7 to make sure everything worked for the first launch to the moon. But he had enough leisure time left over to make a trip to Antarctica, which is known for having a lot of lunar meteorites. And he collected a bunch of those rocks, and those were submitted as coming from the moon. According to Bill Casey, my source at NASA, with second highest security clearance to von Braun, he also said they manufactured moon rocks by bombarding them with false micrometeorites in a ceramic slab. So they can fake a moon rock, they can find lunar meteorites and use those as substitutes, and some of them are just, false pieces of petrified wood that they assumed would never be opened. That's why it's a federal crime to be in possession of one, because you could prove that some of them are fake.
Okay. Ryan, if you could pull up ChatGPT and just ask it how the 842 pounds of moon rocks have been verified to be from the moon. I'd like to understand that. I think that's a big question, and I hear what you're saying. I just want to let's pick this apart. If you could pick this answer apart for me, if you could. They're saying that so they lack water, they have high exposure to cosmic rays, they're micrometeorite impact glass, the different isotope ratios.
Yeah, I mean, we have to understand the big picture of this, but a quick side note. The Chinese rocks are dramatically different than the Apollo rocks, by the way. There's a hard-to-find article about that, how the amount of moisture in the Apollo rocks is vastly different than the moisture in the rocks from the Chinese probes, which are actually on the surface of the moon. If you ask ChatGPT, are the moon missions real, what do you think it's going to say?
Yes, 100%, yes.
Okay, because it was told to say that. It's a parrot regurgitating all the false data that was put into it. We have the video, you just saw it, of them faking being halfway to the moon from Earth orbit. They cannot leave Earth orbit in the Saturn V rocket. We already know that. We have proof of that. So that must mean they did something to falsify the moon rocks. This is the CIA's job. If they want a city boy to infiltrate rural farmers in Vermont, they will send a crew to Vermont to retrieve soil from Vermont, and they will shove it up the fingernails of the guy impersonating a farmer from there. That's how thorough they are. We know they faked the moon landing. We have them faking being halfway to the moon, proving they can't leave Earth orbit. We have that reaffirmed by mannequins leaving Earth orbit instead of people, right? So what does the CIA do? They falsify backgrounds. They falsify data. They falsify personas. They falsify evidence. That's what they do. That's their specialty.
Got it. So they didn't falsify the one rock that they sent to the one that was sent
Well, they
to the
did
Netherlands.
falsify it in that it was a good impersonation of a moon rock because it looked odd.
Okay.
I don't know if you remember what petrified wood looked like.
do,
It was
yeah.
a big thing when you were a kid in science class, but it looks really weird. So they said, hey, perfect fake moon rock. And they assumed that thing would be hermetically sealed for hundreds of years. And so that was one way of faking a moon rock.
Yeah, gotcha. What is this deal with there's a C marking on one of the moon rocks? And so is this a part of the evidence that
You could consider it evidence. I don't consider it as strong as the other things we talked about. But not only does the rock have a C on it, if you look closely, there's a C in the soil to the lower right of the rock. So apparently they were using the same TV studio for what are called setups. We're setup 1, setup 2. And so the C rock, which is right there, there's a C in the dirt, goes by it. There's also, you see the lower right-hand corner is like a crease. I think it's paper mache. That rock is paper mache. You see the crease in the lower right-hand part of the rock. So there's a C in the dirt, there's a C on the rock. Now here's something interesting about the Chinese probes. If you see pictures that the AI said were actually on the moon from Chinese probes, then almost all the rocks are sticking up out of the ground. Do you understand? Because of the thousands or millions of years of dust accumulating, all the rocks on the moon are actually sticking up out of the dust, except in the Apollo pictures where they're placed on top of it.
Okay.
More proof that they're fake.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. What about this slow motion deal? So
That's very convincing. You can cue that up from my movie. It's somewhere in there before the window shot, but it's very fascinating. You know, when I saw the part that was broadcast of the alleged Earth floating in space with the fake Terminator line, looks good to me. I would have thought that was the real deal. And so when I see them kind of floating around in alleged 1/6 gravity, looks real to me. But I had professional equipment. I just hit double speed, and you see they're only getting off the ground about a half an inch. And it's so obvious it's slow motion.
okay,
So
let's look at that. Can
yeah.
we? Yeah.
here it is right here. Okay. So then we double the speed, which is right here. So this is the speed doubled. You can see they're really just in Earth's gravity. See that?
Wow.
Pretty clear, isn't it? Yeah.
It definitely looks like he's in Earth's gravity right there. Yeah.
So they should be able to leap. The bottom of their feet should be at least 6 feet above the surface, if not more. But they weren't able to fake that. They used slow motion, and it looked pretty good. It looked pretty convincing to me. And I'm a filmmaker, right? Looking for fake footage. But then when you double the speed, you realize, they're getting off the ground a half an inch, and it's just slow motion.
So there's no footage of them leaving the ground by more.
There's a
than,
couple in the later missions, but they think they had cables on them, like big bungee cables, because there are times when an astronaut is all the way over like this, and suddenly he's pulled back up.
Oh wow.
So they still didn't get as high as they should have, but they were able to, correct that and get a little bit higher in later missions. And apparently the large landscapes, which they decided to do to make it look more realistic, were actually miniatures. That's what the AI said.
Do you think Stanley Kubrick has anything to do with the filming and the creation of this, or was he not a part of the fraud?
Well, I don't know, and I consider it irrelevant.
Yeah.
What's more important is that they did fake the moon landing. Now, I don't talk about Stanley Kubrick in my book or in the movie. However, there he is with his colleagues from NASA. When he shot Barry Lyndon, I think in 1974, he used a NASA lens, the first lens ever made that could photograph under natural candlelight. The fact is, he was the best filmmaker on the planet. Apollo 11 was filmed at Cannon Air Force Base in 1968. That's about the time 2001: A Space Odyssey was being made, which was a film about going to the moon. And I consider it still the best science fiction film ever made. And the point of making it would be for 2001: A Space Odyssey moon and the, quote, real moon to look different, you see. And if they were the same filmmaker, he could make that happen. In the film The Shining, there's the little red rum boy who stands up and he has a hand-knit Apollo 11 shirt on. So it seems like he either knew that the moon missions were fake or participated in it. The fact is they did fake the moon landing, and they had to have someone in charge of the fake photography. They basically had two choices. They could hire the media director at the Pentagon and get great security and amateur results, or they could hire the best filmmaker on the planet and get the short-term benefit of good-looking pictures and worry about security later. That would have been what I chose. Interestingly, Kubrick's last movie is called Eyes Wide Shut. The most famous picture of Buzz Aldrin, allegedly, standing with his arm bent. There's so many clues right there he's on Earth, one of which is that there's wrinkles all in his pressurized spacesuit. How many wrinkles are in a balloon? So the suit isn't even pressurized. You're looking at it, I was looking at it, and our eyes were wide shut. Stanley Kubrick insisted contractually that Eyes Wide Shut, his last film, and he died before its release, so it's like a dead man's request. He requested that that film open on a particular day. July 16th, 1999, the 30th anniversary of the launch to the moon. So I think he was the likely candidate to do it. After I did the InfoWars interview, they had on Kubrick's daughter who said, my dad was too honorable to participate in such a thing, and I would have known about it if it was shot in 1969, because I remember I was 8. Well, it's actually shot in 1968. She would have been 7. I remember my parents had cocktail parties when I was 7, and then we went to bed. What were my parents doing while I was asleep in bed? I have no idea, do I? So neither did she. And what you think about your honorable parents and what they, really did are two different things. Mind you, Cyrus Eugene Akers was an honorable parent who later confessed to committing murder, which is probably, if there is such a thing, less of wrongdoing than faking a couple of pictures of the moon landing. I think Kubrick's personality would have loved making the fake moon landing pictures and people thinking that it was real. It would have been a kind of an intellectual high for him to have accomplished. After that time, he refused to ever set foot in the United States ever again or to fly on an airplane. So I think he was afraid, and he, died before the release of that movie, and he would have been my candidate, even though I think it's irrelevant who did it. I would say the odds are he had something to do with it.
Yeah, it's a lot of little bits and pieces of evidence and little things that have been,
I mean, he's hanging out at NASA. NASA gives him a lens. He puts Apollo 11 in his movie. He insists that his last film opened on the 30th anniversary of the launch to the moon. A lot of clues there, aren't there?
Yeah, for sure. All right, a couple of more questions. What do you think that Apollo 13 was sabotaged as well?
No, it was a scam.
Okay.
What happened was after they went to the moon the second time, people were telephoning the networks complaining that reruns of I Love Lucy were being interrupted. I mean, imagine right now they're planting a flag at the South Pole for the very first time. I mean, right now. We'd probably stop and take a break, right? Hey, let's watch this. Okay, they plant the flag. Now we're having this interview, another interview 6 months later, and they're planting a flag for the second time. Are we going to stop and look at it? Probably not. And so they were making money, so much money, billions and billions of dollars by pretending to go to the moon. And after people saw it one time, on the second occasion, they were complaining reruns of I Love Lucy were being interrupted. So the very next mission was exciting. Life and death jeopardy. Well, the Illuminati loved the number 13. Apollo 13 on April 13th at 1313 military time had this alleged accident to add drama to it all. Not to mention Apollo comes from Apollyon, which means Lucifer and deceiver. So the fact that the whole thing is a deception is right there in the name, you see?
Okay. Yeah. Interesting. Did they really lose the tapes, like the original tapes of the? So how much of that landing? I mean, you said we have like 20 minutes of that thing and 20 photographs. Is that right? And
from the surface of allegedly the moon, from Apollo 11, there's fewer than 20 pictures of an astronaut, a still picture, an astronaut standing on the surface. Considering it's mankind's greatest accomplishment, that's not that many, and there's zero of Neil Armstrong. I personally went to the vaulted archives at NASA, and I said, can you show me a photograph of Neil Armstrong on the moon? I said, sure, we'd be glad to. They went in, came out, went in, came out, went in, came out. He refused to have his picture taken about it. So he didn't want to be associated with it. He doesn't like to talk about it. He rarely gave interviews. There is a clip, though, and it's at the end of A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon, again on my website, where he speaks on the 25th anniversary at the personal request of Bill Clinton. A group of high school students was touring the White House, and he says to them, perhaps someday you'll be able to remove one of truth's protective layers. And he's, saying something right there. Here he is right now.
Students among America's best. To you, we say, we have only completed a beginning. We leave you much that is undone. There are great ideas undiscovered, breakthroughs available to those who can remove one of truth's protective layers.
Pretty amazing.
Yeah.
And then at their one and only press conference, they look like they're at the funeral of their mother. For the whole hour.
Right.
They don't want to be there. They don't like it. And if you notice, there are TV monitors in their desks to tell them what it was like to walk on the moon, which only they should know, right?
And Ryan, can you play that video of the little girl asking the question to Buzz? It was Buzz, right? Yeah. Can you play that video, Ryan, and then Buzz saying we didn't walk on the moon?
Why has nobody been to the moon in such a long time?
That's not an 8-year-old's question. That's my question. I want to know, but I think I know. Because we didn't go there, and that's the way it happened. And if it didn't happen, it's nice to know why it didn't happen, so in the future, if we want to keep doing something, we need to know why something stopped in the past that we wanted to keep it going. But I think I know. Because we didn't.
There's also a clip that comes to mind.
Is there has he ever addressed that?
Well, ever since he did that, he has a handler sitting beside him. And this reminds me of a clip that we might want to show. So basically, after I produced A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon, I guess from watching courtroom dramas as a kid, would you swear to tell the truth? I thought, well, why don't we just track down these astronauts? We have a millionaire backing us. We hired private detectives to find out where they lived, their social security numbers, and everything we could find. And I set up some interviews with astronauts telling them I'm doing a documentary about the moon landings, which is true, right? And they assumed that I, thought they were true. In this particular case, Edgar Mitchell, we have a TV monitor set up. We show him the window shot of them faking being halfway to the moon. He gets very mad. Where did you get this? He turns beet red. He starts cursing, literally kicks me from behind, which we also have on camera. And in the commotion, we left a very high-quality wireless microphone on him. And in the commotion, my camera operator forgets to hit stop record. So as the camera is being put in the back seat of the rental car, the tape is still rolling, and we're recording the private audio of the astronaut and his son in their house who are saying, do you want to call the CIA and have them whacked? Now, why would an Apollo astronaut have the CIA in his Rolodex? And if I'm some silly person who thinks the moon landing was filmed at Cannon Air Force Base in 1968, why would the CIA care? The fact that the CIA has to be called is, evidence that I'm telling the truth. The fact that they destroyed all the original videotapes, all the telemetry data, all the original hardware, they admit they destroyed. Why would you spend $250 billion on a technology and intentionally destroy it? You would never do that if you went, but that's exactly what you would do if you perpetrated a fraud.
They can't whack you anyway because Yahweh. Because he's got your back, man.
There you go.
He's been protecting you through this whole thing anyway.
Because we have proof that would prove it in a court of law that Apollo 11 didn't go to the moon. And I think it's something that you should see it. I don't say that lightly, believe me. I don't say it lightly.
You have joking, sir. People can have fun.
That's you. That's
and
you.
Maybe do that if they feel like they want to have a little fun on a trip to the moon. And as an independent producer,
okay, we're heading out.
Doing that is against moral ethics.
Lying about going to the moon is a satanic lie of gigantic proportions.
I don't hit people, but you're going to be on the deck unless you get...
I'm heading out. I appreciate it.
And get the hell out of my house.
He's trying to
Got to shoot them at them before they get out of the house.
Kick me in the butt with me. We have a video camera running if you want to do it.
Right.
That would be great footage for us.
Which
See you later.
astronaut?
Edgar Mitchell.
Edgar Mitchell. No shit.
Want to call the CIA? Have them whacked.
So that's good enough there. That's a little short film. Now, Ryan, on our way out...
It says waxed, but he
yeah,
said
we made fun of... We changed it to wax because we did a little comedic short film about me being chased by the CIA.
Okay, I got you.
And in any case...
Yeah, so you went over to his place and his son was there, and,
right?
And what was like just tell me one more time, like why did the interaction? Why did he agree to the interaction in the first place? What was the meeting supposed to be about?
Most of these Apollo astronauts, I guess they have a fixed price because they all charge the same. They charge $2,000 an hour for an interview in cash. So we told them we're producing a film about the moon landings, which is true. And he assumed that we believed that we went, and we put up a TV monitor and showed him the fake footage of the Earth that proves to be a model of the Earth instead of the real Earth in space. That's where he turned beet red, saw that, started cursing and everything. And so he did it, I guess, to make money, to perpetuate the idea that he's a hero, that America went to the moon, or whatever the case might be.
Talk to me about the punch. Talk to me about the punch with Buzz. So you approached Buzz. How did you find Buzz Aldrin? And maybe if you could just set the stage for your plan going into that, what you wanted to accomplish, and then how it all played out.
This is when I had a sit-down interview with him, and I showed him the footage which he helped photograph, the fake footage of being halfway to the moon. He says, "How did you get this?" He says, "I'm going to become a famous person for having discovered this. What an ego I must have. So how could I become famous if I'm wrong?" And then he says that he was just a passenger, that him and Neil Armstrong were only passengers. I need to talk to the administrator of NASA. Well, I thought they were pilots piloting the vehicle. All he did was orbit for 8 days. That's why he was a passenger. So he basically admitted twice that I was correct. And when he realized that, he threatened to sue me if I showed those remarks to anybody. So that's the first time. The second time we met was actually at the Playboy Mansion, where there was, I think it was one of the anniversaries of 2001: A Space Odyssey. And we were on the guest list, and he was on the guest list, and we had some talks there. We had other talks that were private. He made it clear to me that I am correct, and good luck trying to prove it. I have a friend who was at a party with Buzz Aldrin when he was insanely drunk, and he confided in him that he did not go to the moon, just like with the girl. on this particular occasion, this was after those 2 or 3 encounters, I had gone to Japan where they did a shortened version of like a checkout counter book. They do these short books in Japan. And he was the guest of a Japanese TV program who I had worked with before. And I was their surprise guest to get a reaction, see how he would react. So I started tracking down the astronauts and asking them to swear on the Bible. The first 2 times I met him, I hadn't thought of that idea. But in this occasion, I did. And the most important thing to point out is I didn't wake up that day saying, I can't wait to call Buzz Aldrin a liar, coward, and a thief. And he didn't wake up that day saying, I can't wait to punch Bart the next time I see him. It was just one of those things that got heated up. The fact is, if I walked on the moon and someone thought otherwise, I would find that hysterically funny. I would be like, you really think it was done in a TV studio? Really? You want me to swear in a Bible? Sure. What about 2 Bibles? Does that make you feel better? But what it was like is me walking up to him in front of his wife and saying, oh, your mistress says hello. You see, a sword with no point causes no injury. So he's mad because I'm telling the truth in front of the world and his entourage.
Yeah, the truth needs no defense, and he's clearly defending something here. So what happened? You walked up to him. Did you heckle him a little bit?
We were there shooting an interview with a Japanese film crew that he charged $2,000 an hour in cash for. We paid him for his time, and this was the 3rd occasion on which I met him as a journalist. And of course, we've talked privately with him as well. And this is when I had the idea, ask if he would swear on the Bible. He told me he did not do it because he believes in God. That's why he did not swear on the Bible. That's why Neil Armstrong would not do it. It could be used as a video deposition in a court of law. Then they'd be guilty of perjury because they didn't walk on the moon. The only astronaut that did it are avowed atheists because they don't care. They don't believe in God. But the astronauts who believed in God are the ones who refused to do it.
Okay. Let's play it.
Why don't you swear on the Bible that you walked on the moon?
Please?
Why don't you swear on the Bible that you walked on the moon?
I'm not trying to get in the middle of anything. You tell him to get out of here. This is a hotel.
We'll call the police.
We pay.
Come on in here, we'll call the police.
Solicit on
you like that? Why don't you swear on the Bible that you walked on the moon?
It doesn't, sir, I don't have nothing to do with this, but you cannot solicit on this property.
We just paid to rent out the penthouse to shoot up there. So
you can't solicit like this on this property.
Keep shooting.
All right, well then I'd go through my measures.
You got to keep shooting, man. Okay, well, you can put it on your shoulder. Don't be shy.
Just come with me, Buzz.
You really like adventure, don't you?
You're the one who said you walked on the moon when you didn't. Calling the kettle black, if I ever thought of it. Saying I misrepresented myself.
Away from me.
You're a coward and a liar and a thief.
So it was a little bit of a heckle with a coward and a liar there.
Well, the thing is, thief, because we paid him $2,000 to give a testimony about something he didn't do. So that's stealing the money. He also goes to, Sotheby's auction, pulls a paperclip out of his closet every couple of years and says, I had this on the moon, give me $300,000 for it. That's stealing also. Then a liar, for obvious reasons. But he punched me because I called him a coward. Now, keep in mind, I've been a coward myself. The interesting thing is, in the book of Revelation, the last warning to mankind, it warns them, even with God's grace, even with Jesus, you will not enter heaven unless you repent. And it tells us one last time at the end of the Bible in Revelation. It lists a bunch of bad behaviors that if you continue in them, you will not enter eternal life. Sexual immorality, lying, drunkenness. But you know what the first one is? The cowardly. You see, let's talk in a politically correct way. This thing from the last 3 years everyone's been going through. People took a medicine for an illness they didn't have out of fear of dying. And now we find out they might die from the medicine. The scriptures even say that if you continue in fear, what you fear will come upon you. It says in Hebrews 2, the whole world is held in slavery by Satan with the tool of fear of death. When you're right with God by repenting of your sin, you have no fear of death. So why he got mad is because I called him a fearful person, a coward. That's why he punched me. Again, I've been a coward, and the Bible actually says not to swear on anything. Just let your yes be yes and your no be no. So it was, now I realize, inappropriate to tempt somebody to take an oath on the Bible that God said not to do. Also, the Bible says to speak to an elder gently and not harshly. I failed in that way also. However, he is a coward. And the thing that he's afraid of is simply to look bad. Do you remember the conversation we had over dinner? I was fasting for a really long period of time, and I had to put up the needs of somebody, which is serving God, above my wife. That was easy. It was a logical decision. Then I had to kind of go out on a limb financially, go overdraft to help somebody's need. That was a little harder. But the hardest one was for me to look foolish, right? To look bad in front of the minister I wanted to impress. You see, what he's afraid of is to look bad. And that's being cowardly. He should be more concerned about how he looks before God, and especially on Judgment Day. He's afraid, absolutely. He's afraid to look bad. He spent his whole life being established as a hero for walking on the moon, and he never did it. Not to mention selling these artifacts that were never on the moon and making money off of that. Everywhere he goes, he gets first in line, first class, free steaks for being the man who walked on the moon, and it's not true. He's afraid for the truth to come out. If he tells the truth about that, which he should do for fear of God, Buzz, do you really want to not live forever, to be condemned forever for what Nixon and the CIA and all those other people forced you to do, right? Let the other astronauts worry about their own condemnation, confession. Confess for yourself and live forever, you see? And so he would become my hero again if he told the truth. It would be such a beautiful moment. He would lead the way. I made a mistake. Please forgive me. You see, I admitted it now. I shouldn't have asked anybody to swear on the Bible. The Bible says not to do that. I read it, but it went one ear and out the other. The Bible says talk to an elder gently. I didn't do that. I was wrong. I apologized to him. I wrote him a letter. It took me a year to come to my senses, but I eventually apologized for provoking him. And the next day, he ordered a copy of A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon. We have the order, you know, Beverly or Buzz Aldrin or whatever his wife's name was. The day he got my letter, he lowered his guard and he got the movie. But he needs to do the same thing, admit he was wrong, and he'd become a national hero again for telling the truth. I think he's afraid of ruining the reputation of the other surviving astronauts, but they need to fend for themselves. The Bible says, save yourself from this corrupt generation. You know, when you're traveling in an airplane, they go through the safety protocol, and when the masks drop down, they say, if you're with a dependent person like a young child, who do you put the mask on first, right? If you ask, the logical answer is the child. You got to save that child. But that answer is wrong. You can't save the child if you're unconscious. The only time it's good to be selfish is with your own salvation and eternal life. It says that in the book of Acts, first message preached, save yourself by repenting and taking hold of God's grace. And he needs to do the same thing, or he won't make it into eternal life.
Interesting. Yeah, fascinating perspective on eternal life. There, I did a podcast on near-death experiences, and 4,000 of these cases of near-death experiences have occurred. Are you familiar with? Do you believe that these people are telling the truth about their experiences?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I do too.
Yeah.
I do too. And every one of them says that when they encounter God, that this is a non-judgmental being, that there is no judgment day, that there's actually a time where they speak with God and God shows them their life and their past lives, but it's an all-loving, all-caring, all-compassionate, all-understanding being, and that there is no sense of judgment one way or the other.
Well, what they're having is a vision of the future. And there's only a few times where God is given a specific description. God is light. And interesting, it says that God has 7 spirits and there are 7 colors in light. Then it says that God is love. But the third one is God is a consuming fire. And so I have no doubt that they met God and the loving God. That is one side of the coin, which is true. The other side is God hates sin. He says out of his own mouth in the Old Testament, word for word, I do not want the wicked to perish. I want them to come to repentance. He's not going to give eternal life to evil people. That would be dangerous. You see, King David, a man after his own heart, committed adultery and committed homicide to cover it up. But he repented, and it appears he will be in eternal life after judgment. But we do have to repent. God hates sin, and sin will not be in heaven. People have to choose. God's going to give us what we love. He's going to give people the sin that they love, or he's going to give people the honor and truth that they love. You see?
I don't, because none of that aligns with the experiences that people are having.
Well, people,
I understand
you're forgetting, and I'm sure you know about all those near-death experiences of hell.
Let me just
too,
finish
right?
a thought here real quick.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I understand the stories, and I understand what the Bible says, but there's a difference between belief and experience. And so some things, for you to believe something is wonderful. I fully respect that. Fully expect all of your beliefs, and if you turn that belief into a truth, that's fantastic, and you live by it. That's wonderful. Totally respect that. But these are people who have personally experienced death and personally experienced God, and they're not saying what you're saying at all. It's a completely different experience of God than a judgmental person who hates sin and there's no hell and all of this stuff. It's not. None of that lines up with post-death experiences.
Well, actually, there are a lot of unreported, and you need to do research on this. There are many negative near-death experiences. I'm surprised you don't know about that.
I do, yeah.
Where people who did see wrath, who did see demons, who did see hell or whatever it is. The fact is, these people actually did not go to heaven. The Bible says that God knows all of your life before one day comes to be. So if they had a vision of heaven and came back, they didn't actually see what happens when you die, because they didn't die. God showed them a glimpse of it. And I have no doubt what they saw was genuine. God is love. God is a God full of mercy. And God says that he hates sin, and he calls for people to repent of their sin to prove that they love God.
The Bible
it's his
says
world.
that.
It's his rules.
Yeah. The Bible says that. Maybe not God specifically, but the Bible says that. And it's just interesting because it's there's so many different beliefs out there. If you look at the world and you see 8 billion different people on the world, we all create a different reality through our beliefs. I mean, really and truly, we're all living within one specific, unique reality that's based on the culmination of our combined beliefs. And so if you think about it, there's 8 billion different realities that are walking around the planet right now, all based on this combination of different beliefs. But But I think a wise thing to do might be to really listen to the people that are having the experiences, like listen to the people that truly do see see God, or they have their heart stopped in a hospital, and they know that on the EKG that they're gone, they're flatlined, they're no longer in their body. You know, what are they seeing? What are they reporting? What are they recording? So I think if I believe anything, if I err on the side of anything, it's always on the side of the experiencer, as opposed to these stories that people kind of create through their individual thoughts on the nature of reality. The experiencer always trumps that for me, and a lot of people have seen UFOs, and you know, a lot of people have seen very, very, very unique and interesting anomalies that are difficult to explain. If they're outside of a belief system, then we just discount them. But I think at the core, we have to go to the people that are experiencing the things in order to find what is reality. You know, what is the true reality?
Yeah, but people experienced men on the moon and wept, but they weren't on the moon. They were deceived.
Yeah, so those experiencers, in this case, would be Buzz. It would be Neil. It wouldn't be the people that were deceived that were watching a movie. It would be the actual people that were on the moon. And from your perspective, those people were not on the moon. You know, they weren't there. And so that's why I love this so much, and why I love your passion and your desire to get to the bottom of this and to really find truth. I really respect it. And you're going to the experiencers. You're sitting there talking to the experiencers, the people who were on that ship that were working with NASA, that you know, these are the actual people that are experiencing it. So yeah, I think it's brilliant. I love what you're doing. I want to close out and shift from the moonwalk thing, and one of the really cool, fascinating conversations that we had last night, and we'll close on this potentially, is when you were 14 years old, and this is not something that you've talked about before on a podcast. So if you're comfortable sharing it, I'd love to get your the story, your recollection of what happened. You were given certain gifts, and when you were born, and you carried those gifts into life, and you were telling me last night that ESP is something that you have personally experienced, and that you have that you were actually studied by the U.S. government when you were 14. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's just different terminology. The scriptures call it prophecy. I would often have dreams that would come true. Sometimes minutes later. I remember specifically the last dream I had before I woke up was hammerhead sharks. It's kind of a bizarre thing to be dreaming about, right? I click on AOL or whatever I had, email, and the very first image is hammerhead sharks. So I was seeing into the future, 5 minutes, 15 minutes, something like that. I had dreams about neighbors, that they weren't there anymore, that someone else lived there. They were Yugoslavian. The woman was pregnant, and they drove a Volkswagen. And 3.5 years later, all those things exactly happened like I dreamt them. I would kind of daydream and turn, and sometimes paintings would fall off the wall or a glass would fall over the opposite of the direction I turned after I woke up from the daydream. I had a teacher in junior high who noticed this. She put me in touch with Howard Baker, who was a United States Senator on the Intelligence Committee, and he put me in touch with the Mind Science Foundation in San Antonio, Texas, who sent me to Oak Ridge, Tennessee, which I believe at the time had the world's fastest supercomputer. And they were trying to generate random numbers. And there's a bit of a problem with that, kind of like AI. AI really isn't alive, although I have a test that I've created that will prove whether AI is individually conscious or not. So Elon Musk, if you want to talk about that, let me know. So they have kind of the same problem with creating random numbers. They can basically have a program that's programmed to run random numbers, but they want genuine random numbers. So they had a computer that, as best as I understood, had a Geiger counter hooked up to either a small particle of cesium or uranium, and they would assign, clicks 1 through 5 or something like that as they came out, or positive, negative electrons. I'm not sure how it worked, but that's how they would generate random numbers. At the time, I think they told me that every second it would generate 250,000 random numbers, 1 through 5, something like that. And so they would have me try to make the number 5 happen greater. And they had like a little scale of basically 50% was average, whatever I was targeting, and it might go, 49 or 48 or 50.1, 51 point something. And they said that's really as far as it's ever gone. And then when I did it, I remember it went to like 53 on one end or 47. I thought, oh, I'm failed. They said, no, you don't understand. This is a million numbers every 4 seconds. I mean, anything beyond like 1% or 1.1 is way off. And you did, triple the distance that has ever been off before. And then apparently they gave me some sort of subliminal message while I was there. And then when I was asleep in Nashville, they would have me influence the computer while I was asleep over a distance of something like 300 miles. And apparently it did even better than that. I wasn't supposed to, but I got a report of the Congressional Intelligence Committee because the researcher liked me or something. And I was referred to subject BWS, blah, blah, blah. And so that was kind of the last I heard of it. I think they wanted me to move up the chain of command and I don't know, do who knows what for the government. But they analyzed my personality as being rebellious or too crazy or zany or something. I'm not sure what. I never heard back from him after that. But I still have prophetic dreams. I had a vision after a heart procedure a few years ago where I saw, a scripture, the letters in front of me, Luke 21:11, which is a warning that we're in the last days, that there will be food shortages, disease pandemics, and signs in the heavens, meteor showers, something like that. So I think those things are going to happen. I think you or Ryan asked me over lunch, or somebody did, do you think we'll actually go to the moon? And I don't think so. I think there is a cosmic event coming. My sources say in 2029, and it's going to, really disrupt the world. And at that point, no one's going to care who shot JFK or whether we went to the moon or not. So I think in a way, the world leaders are counting on that. They're going to use it to potentially achieve their goal of lowering population. I mean, the powers that be got together and said, we want to go from 8 billion people to 500 million. I don't think they're twiddling their thumbs saying, well, I hope it happens someday. And they probably have a plan, which is sad that the wicked people are that wicked. But more genocide has happened in the last century than in the thousands of years before them all combined. So unfortunately, as things progress, technology, evil seems to progress along with it. And the longer I live, the more I realize the world is more wicked than I previously thought. And a perfect example of that is the moon landing fraud, just arrogantly. Sometimes I'm asked, well, why did they do it? Was it to fool the Russians? Was it, to get the money? I'm sure they fooled the Russians for a short period of time, and they did make a lot of money off of it. But the real reason why they faked it was the same reason that President Clinton gave for having the affair, which he denied 20 times before finally admitting to the truth, after which a reporter asked him, why did you do it? And he said, because I could get away with it. That's really why they faked the moon landing, because they could get away with it. And they have no disregard for the public. And the sooner the public finds out that the moon landings were indeed falsified, both Republicans and Democrats will unite to reform the government.
Okay, well, awesome. I appreciate that. I appreciate that those thoughts, and I guess just maybe one final question for you: how do you get an invite to the Playboy Mansion?
Yeah, well, that's where I met Buzz Aldrin the second time, because I was a journalist, and they were having an anniversary for the film 2001: A Space Odyssey. Or maybe it was in 2001. Maybe that was it. Okay. That they were commemorating it. But I was basically there to track down Buzz Aldrin because I heard he was going to be there. So I applied to be on the guest list as a journalist.
Gotcha.
And was one of the people allowed in.
Love it. Love it.
So,
love it.
If you want, we can show that music video that kind of summarizes my misadventures.
Sure.
On the way out, if you tell me what you think of it.
Yeah,
I wrote the lyrics. Someone else did the music. If you want to turn up the audio.
All right. All right.
When I was born in 65, Grandma Ruth said never lie. The key to life was only truth. Listen to Grandma, old Ruth. In the Bible, Ruth refused to go until the truth she was to know. Great God man said truth to be, would loose my chains, set me free. I grew up dreaming to tell my stories of fancy tales of angelic glory. Instead my train derailed my truth, my dear old grandma, old Ruth. She said the truth was worth to die, to beat old Satan, to beat his lies. I left my dreams to fight for truth, and dear old grandma, old Ruth. A funny thing, my first big film, loved and hated like the heat of a kiln. Hero to some, others wish dead. Hard success, hard head. Astronauts wild, I never flinched. My armor was the truth I pinched. Nervous now that I was groovy. Sweaty palms just watching that movie. I grew up dreaming to tell my stories of fancy tales of angelic glory. Instead my train derailed my truth, my dear old grandma, old Ruth. She said the truth was worth to die, to beat old Satan, to beat his lies. I left my dreams to fight for truth, and dear old grandma, old Ruth. And cursed, punched in the face, I'm facing this life of the human race. Some say patriot, some say traitor. Guess it depends on historical speculators. Astronaut sons of the CIA to take my life far away. Instead the curse fell on his head at 26.
Want to call the CIA?
He's stone cold dead.
Have him whacked.
I grew up dreaming to tell my stories of fancy tales of angelic glory. Instead my train derailed my truth, my dear old grandma, old Ruth. She said the truth was worth to die, to beat old Satan, to beat his lies. I left my dreams to fight for truth, and dear old grandma, old Ruth. Seeds to root, grow up large, a truthful shoot. Then someday when I am old, they'll tell my story I long ago told. Except now they'll say instead of Ruth, Bart's the grandpa of this old truth. Not really true, 'twas Bill before me, and Jesus my brother, waiting for me in glory. I grew up dreaming to tell my stories of fancy tales of angelic glory. Instead, my train derailed my truth by dear old grandma, old Ruth. She said the truth was worth to die, to beat old Satan, to beat his lies. I left my dreams to fight for truth, and dear old grandma, old Ruth. Like dear old grandma, old Ruth. Love dear